Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a childhood where gold is everywhere, but no one tucks you in. We're talking about the kind of upbringing that sounds luxurious on paper, but feels more like being raised in a museum with armed guards instead of parents. Welcome to Royal Childhood. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not emotionally anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your city and time in the comments. I always love seeing who's listening from across the world while this plays in the background. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born not into a family but into a dynasty. From the moment your eyes open, the world around you doesn't exhale in joy, it bows in expectation. You're not baby you. You are His or Her Royal Highness the future something. The midwife may be warm, maybe, but the room is cold. Cold like marble. Cold like lineage. Cold like duty. Because this isn't just any nursery, it's a public event disguised as a private moment. Even your first cry is political theatre. Before you've even figured out how to hold up your own head, everyone else is already projecting centuries of destiny onto your tiny wrinkled form. You don't have parents the way other children do, you have sovereigns. Even your mother, who just hours ago pushed a future empire through unimaginable pain, doesn't get to cradle you freely. She's not there for bonding, she's there for optics. The Queen, the Duchess, the Tsarina. Her primary job isn't to love you, it's to ensure the line continues clean and unquestioned. There's no warm chest to nap against, no lullabies hummed in breathy exhaustion. Not from her. That role is passed almost immediately to a wet nurse. Someone you will bond with briefly, and then probably never see again once you're weaned. Because even the act of feeding you, too intimate, too earthy, too common, royalty delegates its love. Here's the brutal truth. Your value isn't in being loved, it's in being useful. You're not someone, they see you as something, a future treaty, a piece of chess, a potential ruler or a valuable pawn. And so, they begin shaping you early, first through separation. Even as an infant, you're moved to separate rooms, kept under watch by strangers trained to keep you quiet, clean and ceremonial. They don't smile when they talk to you. They document your progress like you're a lab subject. How many teeth, how many steps, how long you cried. Affection doesn't belong here. Routine does. And of course, the cradle isn't just any cradle. It's ornate, carved centuries ago by a royal carpenter, passed down through 5 dynasties, covered in velvet, polished weekly, but does it rock? Barely. Is it comforting? Nope. It's stiff, stately, and weirdly tiny, as if to remind everyone you aren't meant to grow too wild. Even your sleep is symbolic. Let's talk about one historical fact here. Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, was born into one of the most luxurious courts in European history, but as a baby, he didn't sleep in the arms of his mother, Queen Anne of Austria. He was immediately surrounded by maids of honour, nurses and aristocratic handlers. His mother, his actual mother, visited him on a fixed schedule. No surprises, no comfort sessions. Just court etiquette in tiny doses. A literal schedule of maternal affection. And while we're at it, here's your quirky twist. Some royal babies were actually dressed in miniature military uniforms or ceremonial robes before they could even walk. Imagine being swaddled in brocade and gold trim while still leaking from both ends. There are portraits, actual oil paintings, of toddlers looking like mini generals staring grimly into the distance as if they already hate their lives. Because they kind of do. Now, this part is still debated among historians, whether royal children truly lacked emotional attachment, or if their bonds were just deeply private and hidden from official records. Some letters, especially between mothers and children, hint at tenderness, handwritten in between formalities. But we don't have the full picture. What we do know, public displays of affection were not just discouraged, they were often punished. To be royal was to be above sentiment, or at least to fake it convincingly. So, here you are. Not even old enough to babble properly, and already your life is defined by distance. You can't toddle into your mother's room, she's in the state wing. You don't get to crawl around the garden, you're only allowed in pre-scheduled airings, where someone will carry you under a lace parasol while nobles murmur compliments you can't understand. Your tears aren't soothed, they're noted in the logbook. Your smiles are political currency. And if you ever do manage to bond with one of your caretakers, enjoy it while it lasts. Because nannies, nurses and governesses are routinely rotated. The crown doesn't like attachment. Attachment breeds unpredictability. You don't belong to anyone. You belong to everyone, which really means you belong to no one at all. Some nights, when the candles flicker and everyone else is gone, you might stare up at the ornately carved ceiling, tiny fist curled beside your cheeks, wondering, on some instinctual level, why it feels like something is missing, why no one sings to you, why the silence feels so final. But you're too young to name it, too young to know the word for it. The word is love. But for now, that's a luxury you simply don't get. It's early morning and you're already being dressed, by hands that aren't gentle but practiced. You're stripped, wiped down with a linen cloth dipped in rose water and stuffed into clothing you didn't choose. A high-collared smock, stockings held up with ribbons, tiny slippers that slide too much on the parquet floor. You're maybe 2 years old now, possibly 3, but the concept of choice has yet to enter your life. You are handled, positioned, presented. Because even your body isn't yours, it's the court's, a public property to be maintained like the palace gardens. You still don't eat with your parents. Meals for you happen in a smaller, colder room, with a tray brought in by servants and a governess who eyes your table manners, like they're part of a national exam. You're allowed to use a spoon, but not your fingers. No mess, no slurping, no joy. The food is tepid by the time it gets to you, but that's not a concern. Appetite is low on the priority list. Appearances, always at the top. And speaking of early priorities, your mother, if she even breastfed you at all, and that's a big if, has long since returned to her duties, mostly symbolic, always public. She attends daily audiences, receives ambassadors, walks through the gardens with her retinue like a moving sculpture. Sometimes she passes near your nursery. You catch a glimpse, a wave maybe, but not a hug, not a storybook moment. Those don't exist here. So the wet nurse takes her place, or took, rather, because by now she's probably been dismissed, maybe even sent back to the countryside, her task complete. In her place, a rotation of caretakers, maids, nannies, governesses, some kind, others frightening in their formality. They don't answer your questions with warmth. They answer like tutors, rehearsed and dry. They tell you when to sit, when to smile, when to stay silent. Your wants are not their concern. Their only job is to raise a proper little sovereign. And love? That's not in the contract. Here's a hard historical fact for you. In the English court, particularly during the Tudor and Stuart periods, royal children were often separated from their mothers within weeks, or even days, of birth. They were moved into separate residences, frequently staffed with their own independent households. Elizabeth I, for example, spent most of her early years without her parents, living instead under the constant supervision of caretakers and educators. Her father, Henry VIII, rarely visited. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed when Elizabeth was just 2. You think that sort of thing doesn't leave a mark? You're starting to learn language now, and maybe, just maybe, you begin to ask questions. Where is mother? Why doesn't father play with me? Questions like knives cutting through the script. You don't always get answers. When you do, they're rehearsed. Their majesties are busy with the affairs of state. Or worse, children of the blood should be seen, not heard. You're not told that you're loved. You're told to behave. In some courts, you're even told not to call your parents mother. And father, titles come first. Your Majesty, your Grace, the King. That tiny human instinct to tug on your mother's skirts and say "Mama" gets replaced with curtsies and corrected posture. You get used to being formal in your own home. You start to bow instinctively, even when you're alone. You rehearse respect before you've even fully grasped affection. Here's your quirky moment. In the Russian imperial court during the Romanov era, royal infants were often assigned their own staff of 20 to 30 people. Maids, tutors, guards, physicians and valets. 1 child, 30 adults. But the result wasn't a feeling of being special. It was suffocating. Nicholas II's children, for example, had their own private tutors and nurses, but even they reported feeling lonely and disconnected from their parents. Their mother, Empress Alexandra, suffered from poor health and intense anxiety, and their father was more preoccupied with holding the empire together than with bedtime stories. Let's linger for a second on the wet nurse, though. because she's the first person who probably showed you a shred of softness. She held you in the night. She knew your little noises, your sleepy sighs, but she was also never meant to stay. That's the part no one tells you. Her bond with you? Temporary, contractual. And sometimes, when she left, it was abrupt. No explanation. Just gone. You cried. The court pretended not to hear. They handed you to the next in line as if humans were interchangeable. Historians still argue about the emotional impact of wet nurses. Some claim the bond was critical in early development and that sudden removal led to deep-seated emotional scars. Others argue that royal children, unlike commoners, were expected to rise above such sentiments, that from the cradle, they were conditioned to treat love as a weakness. The debate isn't settled, but the pattern is unmistakable. Attachments were created and then severed, repeatedly. And so you begin to develop your own strategies for survival. Maybe you get quiet. You learn not to cry out loud because no one comes when you do. Maybe you develop a sense of control over your expression, never smiling too wide, never frowning too hard, everything in moderation, everything tailored for observation. You learn to hold still, to be dignified, even when your heart wants to scream. Some nights your dreams betray you. You imagine a soft voice reading you a story, a warm pair of arms lifting you from the cold bed, the freedom to laugh without being corrected. And then you wake up to silence, ornate wallpaper, and a governess tapping at the door, reminding you it's time for posture lessons. And that's the thing about growing up in a palace. You're surrounded by gold but starved of warmth. The world bows to you, but no one kneels to tie your shoe. You're important and utterly alone. The walls of your nursery are painted in soft pastels, delicate blues, or pale creams with hand-painted vines and cherubs meant to project innocence and charm. But the air inside isn't warm or gentle, it's ceremonial, staged. A quiet, sterile theatre for a childhood that isn't allowed to feel like one. Your toys sit in an ornate chest carved from mahogany, but they're more decorative than playful. A set of miniature knights, a model carriage, maybe a gilded alphabet board, not the kind of toys you can drag through the mud or sleep with under your arm. If you even try, someone corrects you. These are royal toys, your governess says, not common playthings. You get the sense they're for display more than delight, and so you begin to look at play as something suspicious, possibly even inappropriate. The room is silent most of the time. No singing, no laughter, no giggling footsteps chasing down a hallway. Your voice echoes strangely when you speak. There's always someone nearby, a watchful servant or a stiff-backed maid, but rarely anyone truly present. And when someone does interact with you, it's in the tone of duty, not care. They straighten your collar, correct your posture, and announce your meal times as if reading out orders from a command post. They don't kneel to your level. They don't ask how you feel. Not once. You notice that, and you internalize it. You're beginning to understand rank now, that some people are allowed to smile, to touch, to scold, while others must bow and never meet your eyes. But the strange twist is that none of them love you, not even the ones who kneel. They perform their roles around you like constellations orbiting a star, but you, the star, are left cold in the middle. The crown you will one day inherit already casts a long shadow over your tiny frame. You don't quite understand why everyone calls you Your Highness with such seriousness, but you do understand it means you're different, and not in the fun, special kind of way. There's a strange duality that forms inside of you. Outwardly, you're learning to smile on cue, curtsy properly, hold your head just right for the court painter, but inwardly you're starting to fragment. You want to throw your silver rattle across the room when you're frustrated, but you don't. You want to cry when your pet rabbit disappears, because someone decided it was too unhygienic for a royal nursery, but you don't. Instead, you suppress it. You become stoic. You learn to blink away emotions like raindrops on a window pane. And in return, the adults around you nod in approval. So composed, they whisper, so regal. As if detachment is a skill you should be proud of. Here's a historical gem for you. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was raised in the Netherlands under the strict guardianship of Margaret of Austria. He barely saw his mother and father during childhood. His household was run with military precision. Meals, lessons, prayers, and posture drills timed down to the minute. His childhood letters reveal a boy desperate for connection, scribbling formal letters in painstaking penmanship, sometimes just to ask how his family was. You can feel the longing buried beneath the etiquette, and now the quirky detail. In some courts, particularly in Spain and France, royal children were so distanced from their own parents that they had to request formal appointments just to see them. Imagine being 6 years old and needing written permission to visit your mother down the hall. That's not an exaggeration. Sometimes those requests were denied, not because of punishment, but because of scheduling. There were portraits to paint, bishops to entertain, or suitors to ignore. Love in this world is always penciled in between state functions. And this is where the scholarly debate comes in. Some historians argue that this distance was essential, that raising children with such cold structure was the only way to prepare them for a life of unimaginable pressure. That love might have softened them, weakened their resolve, or made them too impulsive in political matters. Others counter that this emotional austerity created brittle monarchs, incapable of empathy, detached from their people, and emotionally arrested well into adulthood. The debate rages on, but both sides agree. These children were not raised to feel, they were raised to rule. As you grow a little older, you start to sense something missing, but you can't name it. A hollowness in your chest when you see a servant kiss their own child on the forehead. A quiet ache when you overhear laughter echoing from the kitchens, so warm and free compared to the sterile formality of your daily life. You're told this is your privilege, that children outside the palace sleep in straw beds and wear hand-me-downs and die from fevers no one even names. But some part of you, the buried, still beating part, can't help but wonder if they might be luckier than you. You've never fallen asleep in someone's arms. You've never been picked up just because you were sad. And while you're lavished with gifts, silver cups, fine linens and imported sweets, you start to realise that none of them actually fill the hole. None of them smile back. None of them care. You try once, just once, to tell your governess that you feel sad. She looks startled, as if you've broken some sacred rule. Royal children do not feel sad, she says. They endure. That's when you learn to stop talking about your feelings altogether. Each day blurs into the next. Etiquette lessons in the morning, language drills in the afternoon, a walk in the garden where you're allowed to look at the flowers but not touch them. At night, you're tucked into your bed, not by a parent but by a lady-in-waiting who snuffs out your candle and walks away in silence. You lie there, the canopy above you too high, the silence too heavy. You don't fear monsters under the bed. You fear never, knowing what it means to be held. You're now old enough to walk without help, to speak in full sentences, to understand when something feels wrong, even if no one ever confirms it. The nursery, once your whole world, begins to shrink in importance. You're moved into a more formal set of rooms, still within the palace but closer to the centre of public life. This is supposed to be an honour. You're told it's because you're growing up. But it doesn't feel like growing up. It feels like losing what little privacy and familiarity you had. Your toys are fewer now, replaced by books with Latin titles and chairs too stiff for comfort. And the rooms themselves? Larger, colder, designed more for display than for living. Everything around you is curated, including your behaviour. Your role in the dynasty has started to crystallize. You've heard the terms whispered around you: the heir, the second son, the princess, the spare. You're no longer just a child, you are a category, a rank, a strategy. If you're the firstborn, you're already being trained with gravitas. You must never sulk, never complain, never falter. The crown hovers invisibly over your head, even when you're still missing your front teeth. If you're the second, third, or even fifth born, your role is more ambiguous, but no less oppressive. Maybe you'll be married off. Maybe you'll be forced into the clergy. Either way, your destiny is no longer your own. It's a calculated decision made long before you understood the stakes. Sibling relationships, the one thing that might have softened this life, are rarely safe here. You may live in the same palace, but you're housed in different wings, have separate tutors, and eat at different tables. You're competitors, even as toddlers. Every compliment one of you receives is a demerit to the others. If your sister is praised for her elegant handwriting, your awkward scrawl becomes a problem. If your brother speaks 3 languages by age 7, your 2 are suddenly insufficient. Affection becomes currency, limited, conditional, and hoarded. And the isolation isn't just emotional. Physical separation is baked into the architecture of your world. Doors are always closed. Staff members knock before entering. Even your playrooms are treated like formal chambers. You have very few opportunities to just be a kid with other kids. Every interaction is scheduled, every playdate is arranged, and always with children of equal or higher rank. You're not allowed to roughhouse or wrestle, or chase each other screaming through the halls. That would be unseemly. That would be common. No one wants a future monarch with scuffed knees and untamed hair. The adults around you use a particular kind of language. Words like duty, decorum, nobility. You hear those more often than fun, joy, or especially love. You start to mimic the words without understanding them, fully. You know that decorum means sitting still, even when your legs itch to move. You know that nobility means keeping your face blank when you drop something or mess up your grammar. You begin to develop a second self, the public one, the one that performs. It smiles when told to. It recites facts like a trained parrot. It laughs when prompted. Your real self? That one you keep hidden, that one has nowhere to go. Here's a historical bit for you. Maria Theresa of Austria, one of the most formidable empresses in European history, raised 16 children. 16. But even with that massive brood, she did not raise them with what we'd call love. Each child was viewed primarily as a diplomatic tool. She strategically married them off across Europe like a living game of Risk. Her daughter, Marie Antoinette, perhaps the most famously tragic royal child, grew up in the glittering but emotionally barren court of Vienna before being packed off to France at 14 to become queen. When she arrived in Versailles, her beloved dog had to be left behind at the border. No exceptions. Even the dog was too personal. Want a quirky twist? In certain royal courts, particularly in 17th century France, it was considered scandalous for parents to show affection in public. There are recorded incidents of monarchs scolding their wives for hugging their children at court functions. The reasoning? Affection was for private citizens, not rulers. Rulers didn't indulge. Rulers endured. Even a kiss on the forehead could be seen as unbecoming. And here's the debate. Some argue that the system wasn't designed to withhold love. It just didn't value it the way we do now. In earlier centuries, emotional attachment wasn't seen as essential for childhood development. Survival was. Alliances were. Legitimacy was. A parent wasn't praised for being nurturing. They were praised for producing heirs and maintaining power. Still, others contend that even by those standards, royal childhoods were abnormally cold. That the psychological cost of this emotional neglect left marks, not just on the monarchs themselves, but on entire empires ruled by people who had never known kindness. As you're led through another language lesson, this time Italian, or maybe classical Greek, you glance out the window and see a group of common children playing in the street. They're loud, unkempt, wild. Their laughter drifts up through the marble arches like a warm breeze. And you? You sit at your polished desk, gripping a quill, tracing calligraphy loops while your tutor clears his throat in disapproval. You feel the gap between you and them widening, not just in social class, in humanity. Occasionally, there are state occasions, birthdays, feast days, parades, where you're dressed up like a doll and paraded through rooms of strangers. People cheer, nobles nod. You're supposed to wave, smile, maybe bow. It feels hollow, like shouting into a canyon and hearing nothing back. Everyone applauds your appearance, your manners, your outfit. No one asks how you're doing. Even when you cry, which you try not to, no one holds you. At best, they hush you. At worst, they scold you. Don't let anyone see you like this. Do you want people to think you're weak? Princes and princesses don't cry. You start to internalize it. The tears stop coming. But not because the sadness goes away. It just goes deeper. It builds a little room inside your chest, where no one else is allowed. You visit it alone, at night, when everyone else is gone. That's where your true self lives now. Quiet, curled up, waiting for something it doesn't even know the name of. You're 5 years old now. Old enough, they say, to begin your formal training. Not the soft kind, like how to tie your shoes or spell your name. No, your childhood is officially over. Or maybe it never really started. What begins now is instruction in how to be less human, more royal. Tutors arrive, serious men with powdered wigs or heavy robes depending on which century you're born into. They don't smile, they never kneel, they treat you like a project, not person. You sit straight-backed on a chair that's too tall, legs dangling while they launch into history, theology, diplomacy, and warfare. You don't even understand half the words. You nod anyway. Confusion isn't permitted. Mornings begin with drills, not physical, emotional. You're asked to recite genealogies, your own family tree stretching back like a cold, unbroken chain. You're expected to know which king was beheaded, which great-uncle married his cousin to secure a treaty, which distant relative claimed a throne and lost it in battle. All of this, you're told, is your inheritance. You must honour it. You must defend it. But what you really feel is the weight of it pressing down, stone upon stone. You don't get to ask why, or whether you even want it. Every lesson, every correction, every carefully worded scolding is training you not just in knowledge, but in obedience, and in disassociation. If you make a mistake, mispronounce a Latin word or fail to remember a birth date, you're not just corrected, you're shamed. Tutors exchange glances, notes are taken. Sometimes these reports are passed to your parents, or worse, your court advisors. You begin to feel watched all the time. You start apologising for things you didn't even realise were wrong. You flinch when someone raises their voice, not because they'll strike you, they won't, not here, but because emotional punishment can be more precise than physical. The disappointed look, the murmured, "That's not very regal, is it?" And it's not just academic. You're also trained in posture, poise, performance, how to stand during ceremonies, how to walk beside a parent without upstaging them, how to smile just enough to seem approachable but not enough to look foolish. There are entire sessions dedicated to the art of public neutrality, how to keep your face still while nobles argue around you, or when someone insults your father in clever coded language. You're 5, but you're already being taught to listen like a spy and smile like a statue. Let's dip into a historical example. Young Peter the Great of Russia was educated by a revolving door of tutors who taught him not just subjects, but how to survive a paranoid court. He learned early that trust was dangerous, and that knowledge was power, literal power, the kind that meant life or death. As a child, Peter witnessed executions, betrayals, palace intrigues. He didn't have teddy bears, he had conspiracies, and from that mould a Tsar emerged. But not everyone came out of royal training intact. Some fractured under the pressure. King George III of England, yes, the one who lost the American colonies, was raised under such strict and punishing educational regimens that historians believe it shaped his deep insecurity and eventual mental instability. His father died when he was just 12, and his mother and advisors launched him into non-stop lessons designed to toughen him. They succeeded, but at what cost? Here's your odd little twist. In 18th century Prussia, Frederick the Great's father was so obsessed with military discipline that he had Frederick beaten and imprisoned as a boy for preferring music and philosophy to swords and drills. At one point, young Frederick tried to flee the court, literally escape his own destiny. He was caught. His best friend, who helped him, was executed in front of him. Nothing says, "Welcome to royal life," like a public beheading before puberty. Of course, not all scholars agree on the long-term damage of such early discipline. Some argue that these intense educations forged remarkable leaders, people with high intellectual capacity, complex worldviews, and historical awareness far beyond their years. And sure, that might be true. But even they admit, empathy often didn't survive the process. What emerged from those palace schools weren't balanced individuals. They were machines, shaped for policy, not people. And you're becoming one of them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, your sense of self is slipping beneath layers of titles, expectations, and routines. You don't laugh much anymore, not genuinely. When you do, it feels weird, like you've broken a rule. You're praised for being calm, but really you're just numb. You're told you're dignified, but really you've learned not to show how scared you are. Even when you fall, scrape your knee during a rare outdoor excursion, you don't cry. You just stare at it, waiting for someone to tell you what to do, waiting to be evaluated, and no one touches you, not kindly, not casually. Physical affection, that simplest of comforts, has been erased from your daily life. You start to forget what it feels like. A hand on your shoulder. A reassuring squeeze. Even the rare occasions when your mother visits are stiff, scheduled. She pats your head. Maybe. Her words are careful. You don't lean into her. You know better. You sit straight, nod, answer her questions like an adult. The second you reach for anything real, her hand, a smile, she pulls away. Not harshly. but just enough to remind you, this isn't love, this is legacy. And so you adapt. Because what else can you do? You become excellent at pretending. You become fluent in ceremony. And every time you suppress an impulse, to ask for a hug, to cry, to say, I'm tired, you get a little better at disappearing into the role. You begin to understand that being royal doesn't mean being more than human, it means being less. You start to notice that emotions are treated like problems, not just messy or inconvenient, but dangerous. They're things to be managed, contained, filtered through layers of etiquette and formality until they disappear. And if they don't, then you failed. Again. So when you feel anything too big, too joyful, too frightened, too sad, you learn to push it down. Smile if you must, bow if you're told, but never ever reveal what's really going on inside. The palace is no place for vulnerability, it's a stage, and you're both the actor and the prop. Discipline is a daily performance. You don't run in the halls, you glide. You don't shout when you're excited, you nod with controlled enthusiasm. Your breakfast is eaten in silence, monitored by the governess standing nearby with hands folded so tightly her knuckles go white. If you reach for the wrong utensil or forget to say thank you before drinking your watered-down juice, she clears her throat. A subtle warning. She won't strike you. That's not her job. Her power is in the pause, in the look, in the notation in her ledger. Later you'll hear about it in your tutor's disapproving tone, maybe even in your father's cool glance from across a dinner table. Every slip is remembered, every blush of emotion archived. Your mistakes, though harmless, are treated like cracks in a statue. Each one is sanded down quickly, quietly, until the surface is smooth again. But underneath, the fractures spread. They don't see them. You do. If you ever break down, which, let's be honest, happens less and less, no one comes to hold you. There is no lap to cry into, no arms that open. Instead, there's correction. Compose yourself. Act your station. One time, after a particularly bad day, when you dropped a glass in front of a visiting duke and felt your face flush with shame, you went to bed early. Not as punishment, but because there was simply nowhere to put your feelings. You lay there staring at the high canopy above, covers tucked so tightly around you that moving felt like rebellion. And in the quiet you whispered to yourself, I hate this. But only once, and only into the pillow. In another life, maybe you'd have had a tantrum, kicked something, thrown your arms around your mother and cried until your throat hurt. But in this life, that's not an option. Here, you're a reflection of the family, of the realm, of legacy. Your every move is political. Even your sighs are watched. You've stopped showing real emotion even when you're alone, just in case someone sees through the keyhole. Now let's step into history for a second. In the court of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, royal children were assigned ladies of the bedchamber and governors who monitored their behaviour around the clock. There are documented moments when little Louis Charles, the doomed Dauphin, was scolded publicly for childish acts like laughing too loud or refusing his vegetables. Eventually, after the revolution, he was imprisoned, separated from his mother, and subjected to psychological torment. But the emotional damage started long before the Bastille fell. He was being taught from infancy that obedience mattered more than happiness. Let's add a quirky detail too. In 18th century Spain, royal children were forbidden from playing with certain toys, lest they become too familiar with objects associated with commoners. No spinning tops, no rag dolls, only miniature thrones, model soldiers, and religious figurines. One Spanish infanta was given a gold-plated miniature church to play with, complete with pews, altarpiece, and tiny incense burners. Fun, right? Historians have debated whether this rigid control was about building strength or just plain fear. Some say monarchs wanted their children toughened, forged like swords for the battlefield of politics. Others argue it was never about the child at all. It was about the image. The fantasy of royalty, polished and detached, had to be maintained at all costs. Emotions made that fantasy feel too real, too human, too fallible. And so, here you are, being whittled down day by day. Your world is full of clocks and rituals and rooms that echo when you speak. You notice how other children, non-royals, get to tumble in the dirt, scrape their knees, shout when they're frustrated. You see them from behind palace gates, from the window of your carriage, from the edge of a controlled garden walk. Sometimes you imagine what it must be like to be one of them. You try to picture a life where crying doesn't carry consequences, where a bad mood doesn't become a formal complaint, where bedtime means being sung to instead of being left in silence. But you also feel guilt for wanting that. You're told, over and over, that your position is a blessing. You live in palaces, you wear silk, you eat cake that costs more than a servant's wages. Wanting more, especially something as mundane as love, feels greedy. And so you learn not just to suppress, but to self-police. You become your own guard, your own scolder, your own trainer. At night, your mind doesn't race the way it should. You don't fantasize about toys or candy or adventures in the forest. Instead, you rehearse conversations, perfect imaginary apologies for small slip-ups. You picture your next audience with your mother and try to find the exact balance between respectful and distant. You worry about your posture in your dreams. You wake up not feeling rested but braced for another day of precision. And the worst part, the adults think it's working. They smile when they see you mimic their cold grace. They praise your restraint. They marvel at your composure. But deep down, something inside you is going quiet. That little voice, the one that once asked why no one holds you when you cry, is growing quieter with every passing year. Not because it's found an answer, but because it's learned that no one is listening. Your caretakers, the ones who feed you, dress you, wake you with a firm knock on the door and a "Good morning, Your Highness." They all have another job, one they never speak aloud, but that lingers in every glance they give you. They're watchers, informants, every nanny, every footman, every governess with perfectly pinned hair and a clipboard tucked under her arm. They're reporting on you, maybe not daily, but certainly often. You realise this not all at once, but gradually, like discovering the floor beneath you has been glass this entire time. You learn the signs. When your favourite toy goes missing after a tantrum, though no one said you were being punished. When your father, who barely speaks to you directly, references something you said in private to your tutor. Or when your mother arrives for a brief perfumed visit and gently suggests you take your lessons more seriously, despite having been absent from every lesson you've ever had. These aren't coincidences. You're being observed, evaluated, graded, not for approval, but for control. You start censoring yourself. At first, you just hesitate. You choose your words more carefully when your governess asks how you're feeling. Later, you start answering questions with questions. "Did you enjoy your lunch?" gets met with, "Did you?" Eventually, you say as little as possible. Even your silence is carefully curated, rehearsed like a speech. You find places in the palace where no one follows, under the table in the library, or the narrow space behind the wardrobe in your dressing room. But even there, you're not sure you're truly alone. Sometimes you catch your reflection in the glass of a cabinet door and shiver. You're beginning to mistrust even yourself. The strange part is, some of the people who report on you also seem to like you. The older nanny with the soft hands who sneaks you candied fruits when no one's watching, or the maid who tucks your slippers near the fire so they're warm in the morning. They're kind in their way. But it's not real love, not safe love. It's the affection of someone who could be dismissed tomorrow for stepping out of line. And worse, they might still write down the day you failed to curtsy, or cried after a nightmare. Affection is not a shield, it's a variable. Here's a fact, blunt and unromantic. In many European courts, especially during the 17th and 18th centuries, royal children's caregivers were carefully selected not just for skill, but for political loyalty. In France, for instance, the governess of a royal child was often from a noble family with close ties to the monarchy. Her job wasn't just to educate or nurture, it was to ensure the child stayed aligned with the ruling faction. A wrong word, a rebellious gesture, even the way you chose your favourite colour, could be interpreted as a reflection of political leanings. You're not just being raised, you're being sculpted. And now for your fringe detail. In some royal households, staff were instructed to observe children through hidden peepholes or to stand silently behind curtains during lessons. There are accounts from Versailles that describe servants who lived practically inside the walls, always nearby, always invisible, like ghosts with notebooks. Imagine being 6 and never quite sure if the room is truly empty. That's not parenting, that's surveillance. Historians still argue whether these watchers believed they were helping, Some insist that governesses formed close bonds with their charges, becoming surrogate mothers in cold palaces. There are letters that seem to support this, sweet notes, small tokens, even whispered encouragements before public appearances. But others point to the institutional nature of the entire setup. Any love these staff had was conditional, monitored, and usually ended with the child's reassignment to new quarters or tutors. Love, in this system, was as disposable as a broken teacup, so you learn to perform. All the time, you smile when asked, you recite what you're taught, you hold your hands perfectly still during dinner, even when the silverware is awkward and your wrists ache. You pretend to enjoy your birthday gifts, imported birds that sing too loudly, a jeweled writing set you're not allowed to use without supervision. You begin keeping your real thoughts in a private mental notebook. You tell yourself that one day, when you're older, you'll speak honestly, you'll live differently. But deep down, you already know better. You've seen what happens to those who don't obey. There's a strange loneliness in being surrounded. You're never alone, and yet you're always isolated. The servants bow and smile, but they're paid to. Your tutors commend you when you perform, but they correct you when you feel. And your family? They visit you like you're a national monument. Briefly, reverently, and with no intention of staying. Everyone sees you. No one sees you. Even the smallest things feel loaded. Once, during a walk in the royal gardens, you noticed a gardener crying behind a hedge. You weren't sure why. Maybe he lost a family member. Maybe he was simply exhausted. You stood there watching him for a moment, frozen in your formal little coat, flanked by two ladies in waiting. One of them noticed your gaze and quickly guided you away. "That's not for you to see," she whispered. You nodded, but something inside you resisted. That man's grief had felt real, and that made it dangerous. At night, you begin crafting stories in your head, little fantasies where the walls disappear and you walk barefoot through the woods, where someone waits for you at the end of the hallway, not a tutor or a guard, but someone who wants nothing from you, someone who would hug you without needing a reason. You cling to those dreams like lifeboats, because here in the palace everything is watched, and in time you start watching yourself too, always asking, "Am I enough today?" And just as often, "Am I too much?" She enters the room in a cloud of perfume and silk, the door opening like a theatre curtain, and there she is, your mother, or rather the queen, the duchess, the empress. Whatever her title, it comes before everything else, including the word mama, which you barely dare to use now. When she visits, it's never spontaneous, always announced hours in advance so you can be scrubbed, dressed and reminded to smile and speak clearly. You've been rehearsing how to greet her all morning, a curtsy or bow, a gentle "Your Majesty," or "Mother, I hope you're well," depending on which version of the protocol you're told to follow today. She smiles when she sees you, but it's not a mother's smile. It's more like a portrait come to life, polished, practiced, ever so slightly distant. Her eyes glance over your clothes, your posture, the state of your shoes. She compliments you in the same tone she might use for a well-trimmed hedge. "You're looking well." You nod and say thank you. You don't step forward to hug her. That would be strange. You tried that once, years ago, and she had gently but firmly guided you back into a more appropriate distance, like a dance partner keeping form. It wasn't cold, not exactly. It was controlled. Everything with her is. She sits, not too close, and gestures for you to do the same. She asks about your lessons. How is your Latin progressing? Have you improved your handwriting? Did you finish your book on the histories of Rome? You answer dutifully. You don't say that you found the book tedious or that the handwriting drills make your fingers cramp. She wouldn't want to hear that. Feelings are unnecessary clutter. Progress, achievement and appearance. Those are the currencies she values. You tell her what she wants to hear, and in return she smiles again. But it's the same smile. Always the same. You begin to realize that your mother is not a person in your life. She's a role, a title, and in many ways just another extension of the crown you're expected to wear someday. Her affection isn't personal, it's ceremonial. She kisses your forehead occasionally, but only in public, and only when the timing calls for it. A birthday, a procession, the end of a long public function where cameras, or their older equivalents, portraitists, foreign envoys, or endless eyes, are watching. Even affection becomes part of the performance, and because of that, it stops feeling like affection at all. Here's the truth behind the veil. Many royal mothers were discouraged from showing too much love. It was considered a weakness, something that might soften a future monarch. In 19th century Britain, Queen Victoria famously declared that children should be kept at a distance to maintain authority. She herself was raised with that same absence of tenderness. When her own daughter, Princess Alice, tried to show more affection to her children, she was criticised. The prevailing wisdom was that love, especially maternal love, should never get in the way of duty. And in the French court, it was even more extreme. Royal children weren't just raised apart, they were paraded. After giving birth, noble women were expected to recover quickly and return to their social obligations. Breastfeeding was unthinkable for royalty. It was considered animalistic, a job for peasants. You, if you were born into that world, would be passed to a wet nurse within hours. The mother's role? To look regal and move on. Sometimes there were moments, tiny cracks in the facade, when your mother would pause and look at you with something approaching warmth. Maybe she reaches to fix your collar herself instead of summoning a maid. Maybe she lingers after a visit, her gloved hand brushing yours, and for a second you see something behind her eyes. Exhaustion, regret, maybe even guilt. But then it's gone, sealed beneath the smooth expression she's mastered. She's a woman who has spent her entire life being watched, judged, and corrected. She cannot give what she never received. And still, there's a part of you that aches for her, that imagines what it would be like if she were different. If she sat on your bed at night and read you stories, or ran her fingers through your hair until you fell asleep. But even imagining that feels dangerous, like treason against your training. You're not supposed to want those things. You're supposed to want to please her, to make her proud, to become her. And yet, you can't stop dreaming about a version of her who loves you first and instructs you second. One evening, you hear her in the hallway speaking with someone outside your room. Her voice is low but insistent. "He's becoming emotional," she says. "That must be corrected." Your stomach drops. You were too honest in your lessons today. You let frustration show, maybe even disappointment, and now it's being handled. The next day, your tutor begins a new regimen. Longer sessions, fewer breaks, more emphasis on stoicism. You're told stories about past monarchs who suffered in silence and carried burdens without complaint. You understand the message. You were too human. That won't happen again. Let's drift into one of history's haunting contradictions. Empress Alexandra of Russia, mother to the last Tsarevich Alexei, was deeply devoted to her son. She genuinely loved him, panicked over his haemophilia, doted on him, even pushed back against tradition to keep him close. And yet, in her obsession to protect him, she introduced Rasputin into the royal circle, a decision that contributed to the downfall of the Romanovs. Love existed, but it was tangled in power and desperation. In the royal world, even love could be fatal. And here's the ongoing debate among scholars. Were royal mothers heartless, or were they simply following rules they could never escape? Some argue that they chose duty over tenderness willingly. Others believe they were trapped in a system that punished softness, that taught them to guard their hearts as fiercely as they guarded the crown. Either way, the result was the same. Their children, you, grew up learning that love was something to fear, or earn, or go without. After each visit, when your mother leaves the room, you remain seated until you're told you may stand. The door clicks shut behind her. Her perfume lingers in the air, floral, a little powdery, fading fast. You breathe it in like it might hold a secret, but it never does. She is gone. You are alone again, and you don't cry, because she wouldn't want that, because someone might see, because you've learned. There's a knock on the door, precise, polite, and completely expected. You've been told your companions are arriving, not friends, not even playmates really. Appropriate peers, your governess calls them. Children from other noble families selected carefully like rare flowers for a royal bouquet. They're your age, more or less, dressed like miniature diplomats. They enter with perfect posture, practiced smiles, and layers of expectations trailing behind them like long shadows. You greet them the way you were taught. No running, no enthusiasm, a bow or curtsy depending on the title. You exchange names, though you've already been briefed on each one in advance. One is the child of an ambassador, another is heir to a neighbouring duchy. One is technically your cousin, But you've never played together before. Today is your first play date, except it isn't play. It's protocol in miniature. You're led to a formal salon arranged with embroidered chairs, delicate tea sets, and a small table covered in wooden puzzles and stiff-faced dolls. No one touches the dolls. They're too expensive. One of the boys makes a move toward the pastries and is quietly redirected by a nanny. "Wait for the signal," she says. "You all wait. You've already been coached on how to interact, what to say, what not to say." Talk about books, your tutor suggested, or geography, or horses. So you do, kind of. No one jokes, no one gets messy, no one laughs from their belly. You're all trying to remember who you're supposed to be and how not to embarrass yourselves or your families. It's exhausting. You glance at the others, trying to find a spark of something real behind their glassy expressions, but they're like you, guarded, cautious, polished. One girl blinks too often. One boy keeps adjusting his cuffs. You all carry the same weight and don't even realize it yet. This is your first lesson in political friendships. Relationships that are less about connection and more about projection. You're not playing with children. You're interacting with potential allies, or rivals, or witnesses, and always under watch. The room has too many adults in it. They pretend not to listen, pretend to be busy with sewing or standing stiffly near the walls, but you know better. Everything you say is being noted. Every awkward silence is being counted. You're asked to take turns with the puzzles, encouraged to be gracious, patient, and elevated in conduct. When one child solves it faster than you, you're told to smile. You do. But inside it stings. Not because you care about the puzzle, but because you know your tutor will mention it later. "You seemed unprepared," he'll say. "A future ruler must never appear second best." Even losing a game you didn't choose to play can become a liability. There's a quiet hierarchy already forming. The child of a higher-ranking noble speaks louder, chooses first. Others defer. You've been told you're the most important person in the room, but the others have clearly been told the same, and none of you really believe it. It's a contest without rules. One of you will cry eventually, and when that happens, the others will either gloat silently or shrink into themselves, hoping it isn't their turn next. Not one of you will reach out to comfort the one who breaks. That's not how this works. Here's the historical parallel. In the Habsburg court, children of aristocrats were brought in regularly to socialise with imperial offspring, but the expectation was never bonding, it was behaviour. Every interaction was a test, and each child was evaluated not just by their own governesses, but by palace staff who monitored how they treated the royal heir. Were they too familiar, too shy, too clever? Punishments weren't always direct, but families received messages, often subtle, that their child had disappointed his or her highness, which is to say, the child had acted like a child. Now for your peculiar twist. In the French court at Versailles, royal children were sometimes entertained by miniature theatrical productions featuring other noble children. Actual plays, with costumes and scripts performed in front of royal audiences. Can you imagine that? Rehearsing polite conversation by day and delivering lines from Molière by night, all while trying not to trip or speak out of turn. If you were lucky, you might get to play the jester, a brief moment of sanctioned joy. But even that role was coded with caution. Too funny, and you were inappropriate. Too dull, and you were forgettable. The debate among historians here gets thorny. Some argue that these controlled interactions helped royal children develop poise, diplomacy, and social intelligence. Others call it emotional taxidermy, a system designed to preserve appearances by stripping away actual feeling. Either way, the results were clear. Children in these environments learned to suppress spontaneity in favour of performance. They became well-mannered strangers to each other. Affection was replaced with etiquette, and so your play date ends. You say your goodbyes, shake hands, and curtsy again. The other children are ushered out one by one, already discussing with their minders how they performed. You return to your room still in your formal attire. No one asks if you had fun. No one expects that you did. Instead, your tutor appears at your door with a report card in his eyes. "You did well," he says, "though you should speak a little more assertively next time." You nod. He leaves. You peel off your coat, now slightly itchy from the heat. You want to collapse, but you don't. There's another lesson in an hour, and you're expected to compose yourself. You sit on the edge of your bed and stare at your shoes. You don't feel like a child who just spent time with other children. You feel like a minor official in a silent, endless campaign. No closer to friendship, no closer to trust, and far, far from love. Bedtime for you is not a cosy affair. There are no stories, no yawning parents softly brushing hair from your forehead. There's no giggling under covers or last-minute sips of water to delay sleep just a few more minutes. Bedtime is a formal ritual. It begins with a bath, administered by someone who doesn't speak unless absolutely necessary. You sit still as they scrub you with lavender soap, your skin turning red in the hot water. There's no playful splashing, no close your eyes, warnings before shampoo is dumped over your head. This is cleansing with ceremony, not care. You're dried, powdered, dressed in a fine linen nightshirt with buttons so small they make your fingers ache to undo them yourself, though you're never given the chance. A footman or a lady's maid folds down your bedding. Your mattress is stuffed with horsehair or down, depending on your family's tastes, but it's stiff either way. You're not permitted to bring toys to bed, and you certainly don't sleep with stuffed animals. That's for commoners. You're encouraged to pray silently before lying down. No one joins you in the prayer. It's just assumed. Once you're tucked in, someone dims the oil lamps or snuffs out the candles with a long iron tool. There's no lamp left burning beside you. You aren't scared of the dark because fear, like affection, has no place here. You've been told that many times. If you cry out in the night, no one comes immediately. Perhaps a nurse hears and checks on you after a suitable pause, but the message is always the same. You're safe in your bed, therefore your emotions are not important. The room itself is designed to impress, not comfort. The ceilings are too high, the curtains are too heavy. Your bed is framed with gold-painted wood, but the frame creaks in the wind, and the shadows on the walls form shapes that dance just a little too long. There's a guard stationed outside the door, sometimes silent, sometimes murmuring with another sentry. Their presence is meant to protect you, but they also guarantee you're never alone. You're never unobserved, not even when you sleep. It's in this silence, every night, that the loneliness sharpens. The palace is quiet now, its gilded halls hollow, the rustling of distant fabric and echoing footsteps fading into nothing. And you're left with your thoughts, too many of them for someone your age. You replay the day's failures, the expression your mother made when you stumbled over a greeting, the cold voice of your tutor when you forgot the birth year of Charlemagne. You want to cry, but you've trained yourself not to. Instead, your eyes burn with tears that never fall. You've learned how to blink them away. Here's a historical truth that cuts deep. In many royal courts, bedtime was a public affair. Take the French monarchy, for example. Louis XIV, the Sun King, conducted his caucheur, the ritual of going to bed, in front of dozens of courtiers. Even his nightgown was presented by a favoured noble, who took it as a great honour to assist in undressing the king. Children of royalty too had bedtime ceremonies that were scheduled and witnessed. These were not quiet wind-downs, they were performances, and if you're a child in that world, you're not being put to bed for your benefit. It's for theirs, and for something a little more offbeat. In the Austro-Hungarian Empire, some royal children were taught to sleep perfectly still, literally still. Rolling around in bed or kicking off covers was considered unruly, undisciplined. There are written instructions for nannies that detail how to position a child's arms and legs gracefully before they fall asleep. Imagine being posed like a painting before bed, every single night. You don't sleep so much as rest under surveillance. Of course, modern scholars have discussed whether these nighttime routines were about maintaining health, or just another layer of control. Some argue that structured sleep was necessary in a time without modern medicine, that warm baths, early lights out, and quiet rooms help protect children from the many threats of illness. Others say that the absence of any emotional care in these routines reveals more about how royalty viewed children, not as tender beings to be nurtured, but as vessels for future greatness, to be maintained like prized furniture. And so you lie there, still and silent, your face turned toward the embroidered canopy, listening to your own heartbeat. It's faster than it should be. You try to calm yourself the way your governess taught you, counting backward from 100, repeating scripture or Latin proverbs under your breath. But none of it helps. Not really. What you want is someone to sit beside you, someone who says, "It's okay, you're not alone, you're safe." But no one says that. No one ever has. You've come to associate darkness not with dreams, but with self-blame. Every night, your mind replays the day's moments like failures on loop. Did you stand straight enough at the garden reception? Did your voice sound too childish when you thanked the ambassador? Were you too slow to respond when your brother teased you during fencing? There's no one to debrief with, no one to reassure you that these things don't matter. Because in your world, everything matters. Everything is watched. Everything is judged. Eventually, sleep overtakes you. Not because you're peaceful, but because your mind simply gives up. It shuts down out of exhaustion. You drift off with your jaw clenched and your body curled tightly, a child bracing for a blow that never comes, yet never stops feeling near. And in your dreams, if you're lucky, you find yourself elsewhere, somewhere simpler, somewhere warmer, where someone tucks you in without ceremony, where someone sings, even out of tune. But then morning comes, the knock returns, the bath begins, and the cycle repeats. It's your birthday today. That fact alone makes your gut tighten, because birthdays here don't mean what they do for other children. There's no surprise, no silly hats, no candle wax-stained frosting to smear across your cheeks. The day feels scripted because it is. From the moment you wake, you're reminded that this isn't a celebration of you as a person, but of you as a symbol. Another year older, another step closer to the throne, the church, or the marriage contract looming somewhere in your future, like a well-dressed predator. You're bathed, dressed in formal attire, and presented to a row of adults who hand you gifts you didn't ask for. Gilded trinkets, obscure books, heirlooms that come with stories longer than your attention span. You smile and nod, because that's what's expected. When you're handed a ceremonial sword, meant to represent strength and lineage, you hold it as directed. It's too heavy for you, but no one adjusts it. Your arms shake slightly, but the court painter is already sketching. Lift your chin, someone whispers. You must look strong. Throughout the day, people toast your existence. Speeches are made in your honour, and yet none of them mention who you are, what you love, what makes you laugh, what makes you scared. Instead, they speak of destiny, duty, lineage. You sit at a long table for your birthday meal, surrounded by people who are here out of obligation. Your mother's eyes flick toward you only when you misplace a fork. Your father, if he's present, raises a glass but says little. He rarely speaks directly to you on these occasions, unless it's to correct your posture. Once he tried to joke, some dry remark about how tall you're growing, but it came out like a threat, as if your very growth were a calculated gamble. There is cake, yes, sometimes elaborate. One year it was shaped like a crown, too beautiful to eat. But you remember the year you wished, quietly, inwardly, that someone would let you blow out the candles? No one did. A footman extinguished them all at once with a silver snuffer, and just like that, your only secret wish, harmless, small, died with them. You're allowed to open presents after the meal. You tear the ribbons slowly, carefully, aware that you're being watched not for joy but for decorum. One year you received a globe, hand-painted, beautifully detailed. You'd wanted to play with it, spin it quickly, see how fast the world could move under your fingers, but when you tried, someone stepped forward. Gently, they reminded you, that's not a toy. But what is a toy in this life? You can't remember. Here's a historical moment to underline your mood. Young Louis XV of France reportedly received entire miniature palaces as birthday gifts. One included functioning rooms with chandeliers, gold-laced wallpaper, and handmade furniture. But despite these lavish tokens, there are few records of joy, only documents showing the event's grandeur, the guest list, and the political implications. His own journals as an adult hint at isolation and longing. His birthday wasn't about cake and celebration. It was about showcasing the power of the crown. Now for a strange footnote in birthday history. In Imperial Russia, birthdays were sometimes paired with public fasts. You heard that right. While the royal child feasted, the people were expected to fast and attend church in honour of the Tsar's heir. Imagine being told that your birthday is a holy day, not because you're loved, but because you're important. And not the kind of important that makes someone want to hold your hand, but the kind that makes strangers bow deeply when they say your name. This is where the scholars split hairs. Some believe that these elaborate birthday rituals gave royal children a sense of pride and grounding, a reminder of their role in the grand scheme. Others argue, more persuasively, that the overproduced, emotionally empty birthday traditions were just another way to reinforce isolation. It wasn't about celebration. It was about cementing hierarchy. The child never really had a birthday. The monarchy did. After the meal and the gift parade, there's sometimes a dance or a concert. You're expected to sit quietly, or worse, to perform. You've had music lessons, so you might be called on to play a short piece, not because anyone wants to hear it, but because someone thought it would look good for visiting dignitaries. You press your fingers to the keys, heart pounding, and play your carefully practiced song. No one claps wildly. They nod politely, a few smile. That's how you know you did well. By evening, the festivities start to fade. The guests leave in clusters, speaking in hushed tones about your progress, your presence, your resemblance to your father or mother. You overhear one guest say, "She carries herself well, just like a future queen should." The compliment stings. It's about how you look, how you hold your head, never about how you feel. You wonder if anyone knows what your favourite colour is, if anyone even thought to ask. You return to your chambers in silence. A maid removes your birthday attire, layers of satin, stiff lace, and ceremonial embroidery. You feel smaller without it, but freer too. No one is looking now. You sit on the edge of your bed, staring at the unopened books and unopened feelings that now clutter your room. And you think about how other children must be celebrating somewhere, maybe laughing with friends, getting icing on their noses, falling asleep surrounded by voices that are louder than silence. Tonight the silence is sharper than usual. It doesn't settle around you, it presses. You look out the window, the moon pale above the spires, and you ask yourself, just once, just quietly, if anyone would miss you, not the future monarch, if you vanished into the sky. And the answer isn't cruel, it's just empty. That's what birthdays mean here. A reminder of how much closer you are to being what everyone wants, and how much further you are from being what you need. They say blood is thicker than water, but in this palace it might as well be ice. You and your siblings, if you have any, aren't really companions. You're court figures from birth, placed side by side not for bonding but for optics. At first you might try. You're children after all. You reach for each other in the nursery, sit close during early lessons, sneak a giggle or two when the tutors aren't looking. But gradually the system starts its slow, quiet work. You're ranked, measured, compared, and pitted against each other like show ponies, each groomed for a slightly different race. If you're the eldest, you're the heir, the golden child. The pressure on you is immense, unrelenting. You're not just expected to behave, you're expected to lead, to embody the lineage, to never make a mistake. If you're younger, they call you the spare, though never to your face. You hear it whispered, disguised in compliments that aren't really compliments. You're freer than your brother, someone says, or you'll make a wonderful match for another royal house. Translation, you're leverage, a backup, plan, an asset to be deployed. The heir is groomed, the spare is stored. You feel this imbalance every day. One sibling gets the better tutor, the newer clothing, the longer audience with father. The other gets the hand-me-downs, not just of wardrobe, but of attention. It's subtle, sometimes. Other times, brutally clear. At a formal dinner, you're placed 2 chairs further down. During a portrait sitting, your older sibling stands while you're seated, smaller, lower in the frame. You smile in the painting because you're told to, but you remember where you were placed. Even your accomplishments become fuel for rivalry. When you succeed, you're praised, but so is your sibling for inspiring you. When they falter, the disappointment splashes onto you. Set a better example, you're told. Lead with dignity. But how can you lead someone you're not allowed to walk beside? The adults never admit to favouring one child over another, but they don't have to. It's in the way they speak to you, the length of their eye contact, the softness, or lack thereof, in their correction. One child gets firm redirection. The other gets a withering look and silence. If you argue, you're told it's imagination. If you stay silent, you're praised for your maturity. Either way, your feelings get pushed further down, like stones into deep water. Historically, the heir and spare dynamic has been responsible for some of the bitterest sibling rivalries in royal history. Think of Henry VIII and his older brother Arthur. Arthur was the original heir, groomed from infancy. But when he died young, the weight shifted violently to Henry, who had lived as the overlooked younger son. That reversal shaped him, made him paranoid, unstable, and obsessed with succession. And the cycle repeated with his own children. Or look at Queen Elizabeth I and her sister Mary. Their entire lives were defined by shifting titles, competing claims, and maternal favouritism. They were rarely allowed to simply be girls together. Their bond was wrapped so tightly in politics that any closeness was eventually choked out by suspicion. Mary died under house arrest, never seeing Elizabeth again. Here's the quirky twist for tonight. In some European royal families, siblings were assigned different household wings, each with their own staff. That's right, even under the same roof, you and your brother or sister could be raised like diplomatic neighbours instead of family. You might see each other during mealtimes or ceremonial appearances, but even then, contact was often moderated. Letters exist from royal children living in the same palace, writing to each other in formal tones, like foreign dignitaries instead of siblings, and modern scholars are still debating the psychological impact of these dynamics. Some argue that the strict separation and competition forged resilience, created monarchs who could compartmentalise and lead. Others point out the pattern of emotional repression, the trail of loneliness, jealousy, and broken relationships that follow many royal families through history like a curse they refuse to name. Because what happens when your only potential ally becomes your rival? When the only other child in your world is someone you can't fully trust? So you and your sibling drift. Maybe you still speak during lessons or in hushed moments behind a hedge in the garden, but it's different now. They might tease you, but it's sharper than it used to be. They might praise you, but it always sounds rehearsed. You both know the game too well now. You're told it's natural, that all great families have tension. But this isn't tension. It's isolation masquerading as family. And sometimes the cruelty comes not from comparison, but from neglect. You notice one day that your younger sibling hasn't joined you for breakfast. No one tells you why. Later you overhear that they're ill, and that they've been moved to a quieter wing of the palace for rest. You're not allowed to visit. You're not given updates. You send a note, but you don't know if it's delivered. No one discusses it further. They're simply gone for a while, and then maybe gone for good. And because you've been trained not to ask too many questions, you don't. You carry on. You recite your Latin, greet your tutors, sit straight during dinner. But something gnaws at you. Not just the absence, but the ease with which it was absorbed. How quickly the palace adjusted to one less child in the photo, one less voice at the table. It makes you wonder, if you vanished tomorrow, would anyone mourn the child, or just reshuffle the plan? So you learn to guard yourself even from your own blood. You say the right things, offer hollow compliments, keep your secrets locked tightly away. Because trust is a luxury, and love is a liability. And the one thing you're certain of now is this. Even among siblings, royalty never lets its children forget that they are, above all, alone. Every day she's there. Not in the background, not quietly sweeping or softly humming lullabies. She's not the comforting kind of caregiver. She's the governess, with capital letters. Her dress is always perfectly starched, her shoes polished to an unnatural gleam, and her hair pulled so tight it seems to strain her entire face into a permanent expression of quiet judgment. She doesn't yell. She doesn't need to. Her power lies in the way she looks at you when you so much as fidget during your handwriting lessons. A single glance is more effective than a dozen rules. She's not cruel, at least not in a way you could name. She doesn't hit you or lock you in a closet. No bruises, no raised voices. Instead, she breaks you down with correction and silence. She's the mirror held up to every part of yourself that doesn't quite meet the mark. Your slouching spine, your tendency to mumble when uncertain, the way you bite your lip when nervous. She notices it all and corrects it with a tone of disappointed politeness that feels far worse than anger. She never calls you by a nickname. She always uses your full title, even when you're alone. You could be curled up in the corner with a stomachache and she'll still address you like a head of state. She reminds you when to speak, when to smile, when to stop fidgeting. She curates your emotions like museum pieces, clean, arranged, and completely untouchable. Sometimes, when you try to express even a little feeling, a joke, a complaint, a question about why she never laughs, she tilts her head and responds with one of her favourite phrases. That's not appropriate for someone of your station. Her presence fills every moment. During meals, she watches what you eat, making mental notes on your posture. During lessons, she hovers behind the tutor, ready to remind you that intelligence must be disciplined to matter. Even during your brief outdoor walks, she's there, pacing 3 steps behind, ready to remind you to hold your parasol correctly or to smile less widely when the sun hits your face. She's everywhere, all the time, and her silence speaks louder than any shout. Historically, this isn't just theatre, it was the norm. Governesses in royal households were often drawn from aristocratic or politically loyal families, not trained educators. Their primary role wasn't to teach, it was to mould. They existed to refine you, to press you into the role you were born to fill, no matter how sharp the edges they had to sand down. Queen Victoria had such a governess, Baroness Letson, a woman both feared and revered in the palace. Victoria was deeply attached to her in her early years, but even that relationship soured as political pressures mounted. Letson was eventually dismissed, and Victoria never forgot the betrayal. But here's the strange little twist. In some courts, the governess also held the power to determine who you were allowed to love, who you could play with, what stories you could hear, even which toys were dignified. If she didn't approve, it vanished. A soft blanket, gone. A friend who made you laugh too loudly, reassigned. One girl in the Russian imperial court once had a music box removed from her room because the governess felt it distracted her from duty. Royal children lived at the mercy of personal taste masquerading as moral judgment. And here's the part where scholars still can't agree. Was the governess a protector or a warden? Some say she provided the only consistent presence in the lives of royal children, a lonely sort of caregiver who, despite her rigidity, offered a form of attachment. Others argue she represented the institution itself, more loyal to tradition and decorum than to the child in her care. Either way, the result was the same. Affection, if it came, was always filtered through hierarchy and protocol. You once tried to test the boundary. Maybe you were 7, maybe 8. After a long day of memorization and stiff-backed meals, you turned to her and asked, "Did you ever want to be a mother?" She paused, just a beat, enough to make you hope for a crack in the armour. But then came the answer, "That question is inappropriate." And that was it. Conversation closed, wall re-erected. You never asked anything like that again. She seems to know everything about you, your preferences, your strengths, your weaknesses. But you know almost nothing about her. No one talks about her past. You don't know where she's from or who she might write to at night. She doesn't speak about family or hobbies or love. She exists only within the walls of your world, and even then only as a constant reminder that someone is always measuring your worth. You begin to understand that she is not a person to you, but a system made flesh. And yet, you sometimes wish she would yell, that she would break protocol, slam a book shut, say she's fed up, that you're being ridiculous or selfish or hopeless, anything real. But she never does. Her control is ironclad, and in that stillness, you learn a dangerous thing. That being calm doesn't mean being kind, that silence can cut deeper than words, and that someone can shape your entire life without ever once touching your hand. Some nights, you wonder what she does when she leaves your room. Does she remove her shoes and sigh like a real person? Does she write in a journal? Does she ever cry? Or was that trained out of her long ago, just like it's being trained out of you? You imagine her as a little girl once, sitting with her own governess, maybe scared of the dark or yearning for a story. You wonder if she remembers what it feels like to be small and tender and terrified, but you'll never ask. And even if you did, she'd never answer, because she's not here to love you. She's here to mould you, and every day she does. Word by word, correction by correction, she chisels away at the parts of you that don't fit the frame, until someday, if she succeeds, there will be nothing left to correct. And that, they say, is what makes a perfect royal child. You rarely see him, but when you do, the world shifts. He doesn't glide through doors the way your mother does, perfumed and polished. He arrives like a thunderstorm, boots echoing on marble, silence rippling through servants like a breeze through wheat. Your father, the king, or the emperor, or the duke. Whatever title he holds, it precedes him by at least 10 footsteps, and when he finally steps into your line of vision, he fills the room like a monument. Your spine straightens before you even realize it. Your hands go still. Your breath slows. It's not respect exactly. It's survival. He's not cruel. Not in the way fairy tales paint tyrant fathers. He doesn't strike you or shout. He rarely even raises his voice. No, His discipline is more frightening than fury. It's disinterest. You've spent so much time trying to get his attention that you've begun to confuse neglect with power. When he speaks to you, it feels like being touched by the sun, brief, blinding, and then gone. A compliment from him is rarer than dessert. You could spend weeks perfecting a recitation or nailing your calligraphy just for a single nod. Sometimes, not even that. Your father doesn't look at you the way a father should. There's no softness in his gaze. He looks at you like a future investment, like a chess piece he's not ready to move yet. When he speaks, it's never of childhood things. No questions about your favourite colour or what you dreamt last night. He talks of succession, discipline, and how the people will expect you to carry yourself. His words are heavy, spoken slowly, like pronouncements from a mountaintop. You try to nod along, absorbing it, pretending to understand, even when you don't. In public, you stand beside him at ceremonies, a miniature version of his looming frame. You wear matching clothes tailored to show unity. You feel like a doll version of a general. When he addresses the crowd, he rarely glances at you, but everyone else does. They watch to see if you're watching him. They're always checking. Do you hold yourself like him? Do you have his chin, his stride, his resolve? You are an echo of his presence, not yet developed but judged all the same. There's a specific memory that returns to you often. You were 6, maybe 7. You had practiced your bow 100 times. You were told you'd have a moment alone with him before a state dinner. You'd rehearsed your lines for days. When he finally entered, you froze, knees locking, heart hammering. You said the words, almost robotically. He looked down at you, barely smiled, and said, "Better." Not perfect. Then he walked away. That was the entire exchange. You repeated it in your head for weeks, dissecting it like it held the secret to his affection. Better, not perfect. Those 3 words became your anthem. Let's bring in some real-world weight. Tsar Nicholas I of Russia was known to be a towering, intimidating figure, even to his own children. His son, Alexander II, once wrote that speaking to his father felt like appearing before God himself. Their interactions were formal, restricted, and emotionally sparse. Alexander admired his father but feared him more. That fear, that distant awe, shaped him as both a man and a ruler, and created a legacy of emotional sterility that ran through the Romanov line until its violent end. And here's a fringe fact for you. In the Prussian court, royal sons were trained from the age of 5 to salute their fathers instead of hugging them. Eye contact had to be brief. Personal questions were discouraged. Some boys were taught to refer to their father as Sir until their 13th birthday, at which point they were promoted to calling him Your Majesty, even in private. Imagine that, being upgraded to a colder title on your birthday. The debate among historians around royal fatherhood is always tinged with melancholy. Some argue these men loved their children deeply, but didn't know how to express it. They had been raised in cold households themselves, moulded by war, ceremony, and responsibility. To show affection might have felt unnatural, even unsafe. Others claim that love was simply never the point. These were not fathers in the traditional sense. They were figureheads, rulers, dynastic linchpins. Their children were more legacy than family. And so, you grow up not with a father, but a concept of one. He exists mostly in rumours and portraits, stories told in reverent tones by staff who light up when mentioning how he spoke to them once years ago. You see him more in oil paint than in person. When he passes through the palace, you're expected to behave like he's always watching, even if he isn't. His approval, or lack thereof, hangs over your day like a storm cloud that never quite breaks. You begin to model yourself after what little you know. You mimic his walk, you study his speeches, you practice frowning into mirrors, wondering if your brow will ever carry the same weight. Sometimes, late at night, you imagine what it would be like to sit with him, not as a pupil or future heir, but just as a child. Maybe he'd tell you about when he was young. Maybe he'd laugh, or tell you how scared he was when he first spoke in front of the court. But in that dream, his voice always fades. You've never heard him speak with vulnerability, and so your imagination doesn't know how to finish the scene. You want to make him proud, desperately. It becomes the quiet drumbeat beneath every lesson, every posture correction, every carefully crafted answer. But pride isn't the same as love. You don't want to rule with his name, you want to know his favourite song. You want to know if he ever cried when he was your age, if he was ever afraid of disappointing his father. But those questions live in silence, unanswered and unwelcome. Eventually you stop asking. By now you've learned the rules so deeply they feel like instinct. Not the obvious rules, those are written in books and drilled into your spine during lessons. No, you've mastered the unspoken rules, the ones no one tells you directly but that carry far more weight. The biggest of them all? Emotions are weakness. Full stop. Joy is dangerous. Sadness is embarrassing. Fear is unacceptable. If you feel, you fail. So you don't. Or at least, you pretend not to. At first, this repression is surface level. You stop laughing too hard when something is funny. You learn to nod instead of gasp when you're surprised. When you're frustrated, you breathe in deeply and smooth the wrinkles from your tunic instead of throwing the inkwell across the room like you want to. No one praises this directly, but they start using new words to describe you. Composed, promising, dignified. They say, you're becoming a proper royal. Inside, you're not so sure you're becoming anything at all. You just know what to hide. Eventually the suppression digs deeper. When someone scolds you unjustly, you feel the heat rise in your chest, but you don't speak. You look at the floor, offer a formal apology, and keep the boiling locked behind your eyes. When a pet dies, or is relocated for reasons no one will explain, you nod solemnly and thank the steward for informing you. But when you're alone that night, you still don't cry. You just stare at the ceiling until sleep takes you like a closing curtain. Feelings are a performance you're no longer interested in staging. You start noticing how often the adults around you do the same. Your mother maintains her icy calm even when rumours swirl about her political missteps. Your father remains unmoved during ceremonies that would exhaust anyone else. Your tutors drone on through illness, never complaining. No one shows feeling. Not really. You begin to think that feelings might be something you're born with, but royalty spends its entire lifetime undoing. You begin to feel a strange sense of pride in how cold you're becoming. It's a trick, but you don't realise it yet. Here's the history behind your self-erasure. In many European monarchies, children were explicitly taught to equate emotion with danger. The stoic model of royalty, still serene, above human impulses, was the ideal. In the 18th century, Austrian Archduchess Maria Carolina reportedly banned her children from public crying, claiming it encouraged disorder. In Prussia, Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm was punished with solitary confinement if he cried, even after injury. His father believed it would make him soft. Instead, it made him volatile and bitter, a man who loved his dogs more than his ministers. Now for the bizarre detail, in certain courts, emotions weren't just discouraged, they were pathologized. One royal physician in the court of Spain wrote a manual describing visible joy in children as a potential precursor to mental instability. Smiling too frequently or too widely could warrant extra supervision, as if delight itself were a sign of treason brewing in the soul. So you learn quickly. Control your face, monitor your tone, smile, but only with your mouth, never your eyes. The scholars still can't decide if this kind of emotional silencing created better rulers or simply lonelier ones. Some point to monarchs who kept peace for decades, arguing that their ability to suppress personal feelings helped maintain national stability. Others suggest that generations of emotionally repressed royals led to cycles of detachment, war, and passive cruelty. When you've never learned to empathise with yourself, it's hard to empathise with others, especially when those others are entire populations. And here's where it gets personal, painfully so. You reach a point where you can no longer identify what you're feeling at all. Is this disappointment or fatigue? Is this longing or boredom? You can't tell anymore. You just know that you're off, and that showing it would bring questions you don't want to answer. So instead, you pretend. You perform. You perfect the mask. After all, a royal doesn't feel things. A royal radiates calm. Eventually you begin rehearsing your reactions before anything even happens. Before a lesson, you practice looking thoughtful. Before a ceremony, you try out different levels of regal amusement in the mirror. You have an entire catalogue of expressions now, each one assigned to a specific situation. The one for receiving gifts, the one for standing beside your mother during a public address, the one for hearing tragic news. They're all so well practiced, even you start to believe them. But the real cost isn't your public face, it's your private self, or what's left of it. You start avoiding mirrors not out of vanity, but because you don't recognise the child staring back. That version of you doesn't feel anything anymore. That version is impeccable, polished, dead behind the eyes. You remember laughing once, truly laughing, doubled over, cheeks flushed, tears streaming, when you were very small. You don't remember what was so funny. You just remember how good it felt, how wrong it would be now. And maybe, just maybe, something inside you protests. Quietly. On rare days when the governess is busy and your tutor is late, you allow yourself a moment of unfiltered being. You hum under your breath. You dance a little. You whisper stories to yourself, half memories and half wishes. But the guilt arrives quickly. You check the door, the window, the walls. You never know who might see and what report might be sent, so you shut it all down again. You return to your studies, your perfectly measured tone, your porcelain mask. And as you sit there, perfectly still, perfectly silent, you tell yourself what they've told you for years. This is strength. You almost believe it. But deep inside, something smaller, something more human, whispers, "This is surrender." Your education continues, but it doesn't feel like learning. It feels like being rebuilt. Whatever natural curiosity you once had has been scraped out and replaced with memorization. You no longer ask questions. You recite. You perform. You don't explore ideas. You repeat them. History is drilled into you not for insight, but for allegiance. You are taught which wars mattered and which didn't. And conveniently, the ones your ancestors lost are skimmed over or rebranded as strategic retreats. There's no room for nuance. The past is not something to understand. It's something to inherit, and your tutors serve it like gospel. Each day begins early. Your breakfast is quiet, controlled. No mess, no idle chatter. The moment your fork touches the plate, your mind is already preparing for the parade of lessons ahead. First comes language. Latin, French, Greek, dead or living, it doesn't matter. You must know them. Fluency isn't optional, it's expected. Then comes religion, dense and moralizing. You learn the proper interpretations, the acceptable doubts, the royal-approved virtues. After that, you dive into law, politics, heraldry, court etiquette, and, of course, arithmetic. But only to the extent necessary for ruling. You're not expected to solve real-world problems, just to understand how money flows and how to keep your hands clean while directing it. And throughout all of this, no one asks if you're happy. Happiness is not part of your curriculum. No one reads to you for fun. No one invites you to make up your own story or paint something silly just to see what happens. Every piece of knowledge is functional, instrumental and cold. You learn not because you want to, but because not learning is a political liability. You're being shaped into a symbol, not a scholar. Here's a historical reality. Queen Elizabeth I was educated in Latin, Greek, French and theology by the time she was 10. Her tutors praised her brilliance, but none of her studies were intended for self-discovery. They were tactical, tools to defend her claim to power, to navigate a court filled with men who doubted her legitimacy, and to outwit anyone who mistook her silence for ignorance. Her education was armour, not nourishment. And here's something a little more absurd. Some royal children were taught math using coins made of precious metals, actual gold and silver, as if their learning needed to be physically weighted with value. But they weren't allowed to keep the coins, of course. They were cleaned, counted, and locked away after every lesson, as if even abstract thought had to be gilded but carefully supervised. Education, like everything else in your life, is dressed up to look magnificent while being oddly hollow. Scholars have debated this kind of instruction for decades. Some argue that royal education was a gift, a rarefied elite training unmatched in depth or resources, and sure, it was thorough. But others note the emotional and intellectual cost. Royal children were not taught to think freely, or even critically. They were taught to absorb, to obey, and to recite. Curiosity was a risk, creativity was chaos. In a world that valued order above all else, free thought was quietly exiled. By now, you've come to anticipate each subject before it starts. You know the rhythm of the day so well that your body seems to move from chair to desk to lectern without thought. When the astronomy lesson begins, you don't marvel at the stars. You memorize their names and their alignments, because someone might ask. When you study philosophy, you're told what each thinker should have meant. There's no discussion, just interpretation, pre-approved and pre-packaged, and it's not just the content, it's the tone. Everything is delivered with the same emotionless cadence, like the world is made of facts and figures and polished thoughts, not feelings or wonder or delight. When you offer your own idea, however small, when you suggest that perhaps Achilles wasn't just a hero, but a scared young man pretending to be invincible, your tutor raises an eyebrow and redirects you to the assigned interpretation. Let's stick to the approved analysis, he says, with a smile so thin it barely exists. Over time, you start to feel your imagination shrinking. You forget how to daydream. You no longer wonder what clouds taste like or what animals think about when humans aren't watching. You stop inventing stories. There's no space for make-believe here. Make-believe is for children who get to remain children. You're not one of them. The worst part is the praise. When you parrot a perfect answer, you're rewarded. When you suppress your boredom or exhaustion and sit upright through another agonizingly slow passage of scripture, your governess nods approvingly. A fine mind, they say, a disciplined intellect. You smile because you're supposed to, but inside you don't feel smarter. You feel smaller, emptier, less you. Once, on a rare free afternoon, you tried to read a storybook you found tucked behind a stack of politics texts. It was simple, with watercolour drawings and a talking fox. For a few precious pages you felt something flicker inside, something warm, something almost playful. But before you could finish, your tutor entered the room and took the book away. "This is beneath your level," he said, returning it to the shelf like it had embarrassed him. "You never saw it again." And so your days continue, perfectly scheduled, perfectly executed. You grow more fluent in foreign tongues, but less fluent in your own inner voice. You can list the names of every noble house in the realm, but not the names of your favourite songs, because no one's ever asked. You ace your assessments, but fail to remember the last time you felt awe. And eventually you stop caring. You stop wondering. You start believing the lie you're being taught daily. That obedience is intelligence. That memorization is mastery. That compliance is wisdom. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the layers of expectation and ceremonial learning, the real you starts to fade. Not forgotten, but so quiet you barely notice its absence. You're not growing into yourself. You're growing into a role. If there's anything in your life that comes close to love, it might be your pets. Animals at least don't bow. They don't correct your posture or file reports to your parents or pretend they care when they don't. They just are. They eat too fast. They nip at your shoes. They make messes you're not allowed to clean up yourself. But when a falcon perches on your gloved wrist, its sharp eyes fixed on yours, you feel something. Connection, recognition, maybe even a flicker of mutual understanding. It doesn't care about your title. It cares that you fed it, that you held your arm steady, that you didn't flinch. In a palace built on pretense, animals are the only creatures not performing. The hound that sleeps at the foot of your chair doesn't care how well you conjugate Latin. The palace cat may belong to no one, but she chooses to curl up on your lap during cold mornings, and that simple act feels more genuine than any gesture from your own family. These aren't companions selected for diplomacy. They weren't assigned to you. They simply showed up, and they stay. You begin to talk to them softly when no one's around, telling them the things you can't say out loud, how cold the halls feel, how much you hated the last history lesson, how you wish, just once, you could run barefoot through the garden without someone correcting your form. They listen, or at least they don't interrupt. That's enough. Sometimes your hound nuzzles your palm like he understands. Sometimes the falcon tilts its head like it disapproves, and you laugh. Really laugh. The kind that makes your chest ache a little. Of course, even this simple comfort has rules. You're told which animals are appropriate for someone of your status. You're allowed falcons, horses, hounds, creatures with lineage and utility. Parrots and monkeys might be acceptable if you're a prince or princess of a particularly whimsical court. But no mice, no rats, no street dogs, certainly no stray kittens you found behind the stable. That happened once. You tried to keep one. You hid it under your bed, fed it crumbs, whispered secrets to it at night. It meowed during a lesson, and you were caught. The kitten was removed. You were punished. Not harshly, just enough to remind you that your affections should never wander outside the gilded fence line. Historically, royal children have often been surrounded by animals, but rarely on their own terms. In Tudor England, Elizabeth I had a greyhound named Saucy, but she was not permitted to tend to him herself. Servants fed and walked him. The Queen merely watched. Emperor Akbar of the Mughal Empire kept a royal menagerie, and while his children could visit it, their interaction was ceremonial. The animals existed as extensions of royal power, not personal affection. They were symbols, not companions. Here's an odd but charming historical fact. Peter the Great of Russia once gifted his daughter a monkey dressed in a tiny brocade coat. She reportedly adored the creature until it bit a visiting noble, after which it was discreetly relocated. In another court, a young prince fell in love with a songbird that would sit on his windowsill each morning. When the bird stopped coming, he fell into a melancholy that confused his tutors for weeks. No one had taught him how to grieve something that wasn't a political loss, and this brings us to the question that scholars love to circle around. Were pets a substitute for human love, or just another ornament in the royal display cabinet? Some argue that these animal bonds provided the only unfiltered affection these children ever knew. Others believe the relationships were still tightly managed, another layer of controlled comfort, allowed only within the bounds of royal taste and protocol. What's clear is that even the most natural form of love had to be filtered through the lens of presentation. A pet was allowed, as long as it didn't disrupt the image. You remember once watching one of your hounds give birth. It was messy, loud, chaotic. You weren't supposed to be there, but you had followed the sounds in secret. You crouched behind a haystack, watching life emerge in the flickering lantern light. No one was measuring posture or scolding a mistake, just warmth, instinct, and trembling paws. You didn't tell anyone what you saw. It felt like a sacred thing, something that belonged only to you. That same hound grew old. Her legs trembled when she walked, her eyes clouded over, and eventually she didn't follow you anymore. She simply watched. You asked what would happen to her. A stable hand said she would be retired. You nodded, pretending to understand. A week later, you asked to visit her. No one answered you directly. They just said she had been taken care of. You were given a new puppy the next day. A gift, they called it. You were expected to smile. You took the puppy, of course, petted it, named it something appropriate, but something had shifted. You understood now. Even love in its purest form, unconditional, messy, joyful, was replaceable here, disposable. If affection became inconvenient, it disappeared. Just like everything else in your world. Still, the animals are the closest thing you have. You feed them when no one's looking. You sneak them scraps. You whisper to them in the dead of night, hoping no one hears. They become the only ones who know your real voice, the one that isn't practiced, the one that doesn't answer to a title. They never bow, never scold, never leave a note in your file. They just stay. And in a world where nothing feels truly yours, that means everything. One morning, they dress you in something ridiculous. Silk so stiff it sounds like paper when you move. A tiny ceremonial dagger that digs into your side when you sit. A collar that's not really a collar, but some ancient heraldic symbol that itches and makes your neck feel like it's in a chokehold. You're told you'll be attending a presentation. No, not a birthday, not a family gathering. This is different. This is court theatre, and you're the featured prop. They don't say it like that, of course. They say it's an honour, that you'll be part of a display of heritage. You're to stand beside your mother, or maybe your father, depending on which parent has the more politically urgent need to be seen that day. And you're to smile, nod, bow, and generally exist as a symbol of the dynasty's unbroken strength. You've done it before, but this one feels bigger. The halls are buzzing with energy. Even the footmen are polishing their buttons like they expect someone important to squint. Before you're led out, you're rehearsed again. Where to stand, how to bow, which hand to wave with if waved to, which words to say. You may be addressed directly, your governess warns, but you must not speak freely. The phrase speak freely is one of those concepts that you've never truly experienced, and by now you've stopped being curious about what it would feel like. She checks your shoes, wipes a fleck of lint from your sleeve, and steps back like a sculptor inspecting a finished piece. You're not nervous, you're not excited, you're neutral, perfectly neutral. Exactly as you've been taught. The great doors open and the hall swells with sound. You're not announced by name, you're announced by title, lineage, birth order. Your actual name is almost incidental. You walk forward as trained. Each step lands on the marble like punctuation. The adult's eyes follow you, not in admiration, but in assessment. You hear words like promising, well-trained, and composed. as if you're a new breed of horse being paraded at auction. Then comes the moment you hate most, the moment where you're expected to speak. Just one line, practiced to perfection. Maybe it's in Latin. Maybe it's a thank you to a foreign dignitary, or a toast. It depends on the occasion. Today, it's some poetic phrase you don't fully understand, meant to honour the past while glorifying your family's future. You say it. Your voice is even, your tone measured, your accent perfect. People nod, some even clap. But inside, you feel hollow, like a shell that's been polished just for this moment. This is the role you're meant to play, living proof that the line continues, that the monarchy endures, that everything is stable. You're a walking reassurance, a doll in a crown. And yet, you begin to wonder, do they actually see you? Or just the carefully curated version they need to believe in? You're not being raised, you're being displayed. There's a historical precedent for this kind of performance. In the Sun King's court at Versailles, children of the royal bloodline were often summoned to public meals and events not for bonding but for symbolism. A young prince might be asked to sit silently beside his father during a political dinner, never speaking, simply existing as proof of dynastic strength. The mere presence of a child was a political statement. Look, the future is secured. It was less about the child's presence and more about the illusion of permanence. And here's a strange detail. In 17th century Bavaria, royal children were sometimes outfitted in miniature versions of military uniforms and made to stand beside generals during parades. Not because they had any idea what was happening, but because it was important for the people to see that the next generation was ready. Ready for what? No one said, just ready. The illusion mattered more than the reality. Scholars today still argue about whether these public performances served a real purpose or were just empty pageantry. Some believe they were critical moments for forging identity, that standing beside greatness shaped children into leaders. Others claim it was more like psychological taxidermy. Children frozen in time, dressed in regalia, taught to pose but never to breathe freely. You return to your room after the event, your cheeks still aching from the practiced smile you held for too long. Servants undress you with quiet efficiency. The ceremonial outfit is folded away into storage, to be worn again for the next charade. You're left in a simple tunic and slippers, but the weight doesn't lift. You feel like you're still in costume, because you are. The costume is just internal now. You try to remember the names of the people you met, the conversations, but all of it blends together. Smiles and nods and phrases spoken in languages you barely understood. You do remember one moment, though. A nobleman patted your head, too roughly, like you were a dog, and said, "Good lad, you'll make a fine king." You smiled and said thank you, but you wanted to ask, based on what? Because deep down you know it's not about you. It never has been. They don't care what you believe in. They care that you show up on time, dressed correctly, and repeat the lines. You could be anyone in this role. The important thing is that the role exists. You're not being taught to lead. You're being taught to appear ready to lead. Whether you actually are, that's irrelevant. And the worst part, you're good at it. You're very good. You know how to bow just enough to show humility but not submission. You know how to hold your smile in place even when your mind drifts miles away. You know which foot to place forward first. You're a perfect little puppet, and no one notices the strings. But you do. The older you get, the more dangerous affection becomes. Not only is it discouraged, it's scrutinized. Every glance you give, every smile held too long, every word that leans too far into warmth, it's noted, dissected. You thought the palace watched you closely before, but now it watches with suspicion. Because you're not just a royal child anymore. You're a figure with political weight, a potential alliance, a possible threat, and love. The real kind, unstrategic and unapproved, is viewed as both reckless and profoundly inconvenient. You notice it first in small ways, the way your governess tenses when you laugh too easily with a visiting page, the way a servant who once treated you kindly is suddenly replaced, no explanation given. Then you notice the looks, the ones adults exchange when you show too much interest in anyone who isn't vetted. It could be a stable boy with kind eyes, or a cousin with a sharp wit, or a maid who actually listens when you speak. It doesn't matter. If someone draws your affection, they're removed from your orbit. Quietly, Efficiently, it's always framed as coincidence, but it never is. You're warned, gently at first. Be mindful of familiarity, your tutor says, a phrase that sounds innocent until you realise it's code for you're being watched. Later, the warnings become more pointed. That page boy has no future, one court advisor tells you flatly. Affections like that complicate things. You pretend not to understand, you pretend not to feel the pang that follows, but you do, and you learn, quickly. Love, you realise, is not just rare, it's dangerous. Not only because of the power it gives someone else over you, but because of the threat it poses to the machinery of succession. You belong to your bloodline, your house, your nation. Love implies choice. Choice implies agency. And in this life, agency is the most forbidden desire of all. There's a cruel irony to it. Your entire life, you've been paraded as the embodiment of family values, the symbol of continuity. But real intimacy, real connection, that's off limits. The idea that you might genuinely care for someone outside of a pre-approved noble circle is considered destabilizing. People fear what you might say when you feel safe, what secrets you might share, what promises you might make, not in public, but in whispers and candlelight. Take this historical echo. Tsarevich Alexei of Russia, heir to Nicholas II, developed a close bond with his sailor-turned-nanny, Nagorny. He was one of the few people who treated the boy like a child, not a symbol. That affection, simple, human, was viewed with suspicion. Nagorny was eventually dismissed, then executed during the revolution. Not because he betrayed the Tsar, but because his presence was too personal, too loyal, too human. And in the French court it was understood that if a royal child developed a particular fondness for a servant, especially one of a lower status, that servant would be reassigned or quietly vanished. One Dauphin reportedly wept when his favourite attendant was sent away. He was told it was for his own good, that he needed to learn strength. The tears stopped eventually. The lesson stayed. Now here's a little-known twist. Some royal children were given approved friends, carefully selected noble children who were brought in not just for companionship, but for observation. Their letters to each other were read, their games supervised. If affection bloomed, it had to be politically useful. It's like being told, yes, you may love, but only if it benefits the crown. You learn to hide your warmth like contraband. If someone makes you laugh, you smile into your sleeve. If someone brushes against you and it sends a shiver down your spine, you freeze. Not from shock, but from calculation. Every feeling has to be interrogated before it's expressed. Do they see me? Who saw us? Will this be mentioned in the nightly report? What does this look like from the outside? And if you're caught, even in something harmless, there's always fallout. Maybe a scolding, maybe a new schedule designed to redirect your energy. Maybe the person disappears. One day they're there and the next their room is empty, their name never spoken again. You're told they've been reassigned, or that their family moved. You learn not to ask. Asking makes things worse. Worse still, you begin to question your own feelings. Was it really affection, or were you just desperate for attention? Was that kindness real, or rehearsed? Did they like you, or the idea of you? These questions erode something in you, something soft and necessary. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop letting yourself be drawn to others. It's safer that way. Over time, your world gets quieter. Not physically. There are always voices, footsteps, ceremonies, but emotionally. You build a shell so smooth and impenetrable that not even you can tell what's real underneath it. You convince yourself that emotional distance is a form of strength, that the tightness in your chest when someone leaves is nothing, that the ache in your throat when you see someone smile and know you can't respond, it doesn't matter. And then there's the strangest thing. You start to envy the people below you, the servants, the guards, the kitchen staff who steal moments behind pantry doors. You catch glimpses of their warmth, the casual touches, the inside jokes, the way they lean close when they talk. It looks reckless, undisciplined, beautiful. You can't have it, but you see it. You watch it like someone gazing at a fire through frosted glass, close enough to feel the heat, but never to touch. Eventually you learn to speak in riddles. You say things with layers. You express affection through formality. You performed admirably today, you say, meaning, I liked being near you. You showed great composure, meaning, I wish I could hold your hand. No one ever says what they mean, not in the palace, not when the walls listen. Love, you realise, is not forbidden because it's bad, it's forbidden because it's real. And in this world built on appearances, reality is the most dangerous thing of all. You're sent away, not in disgrace, not dramatically. There's no shouting, no bags thrown into the corridor. It's called a fostering, or placement abroad, depending on who's speaking. Officially, it's part of your education, a chance to see another court, experience another culture, learn diplomacy firsthand. Unofficially, it's a test, a shift in control. You're no longer being shaped exclusively by your own palace. Now you're being remoulded by someone else's. You don't get to choose where you go. You're informed, not asked. A faraway duchy, an allied kingdom, or a cousin's, a state, somewhere politically useful, just unfamiliar enough to strip you of comfort. When you arrive, the buildings are different, but the tone is the same. Cold rooms dressed in luxury, smiling adults with sharp eyes, servants who already know your preferences before you say a word. Your name precedes you like a ghost. Everyone knows who you are before you arrive, and they all pretend not to be impressed. They call you our guest. But you're more than that. You're a symbol of alliance, a token of trust between royal families. If something goes wrong at home, if war breaks out, if diplomacy frays, you might not be returned. That knowledge simmers quietly beneath every polite introduction. You understand now, you're not here to be enriched, you're here to be possessed. Your new tutors are slightly different, but the instruction is the same. The local customs, the proper titles, the regional dialect. You must learn their ways, not because they want to include you, but because they expect you to adapt. You're not just a visitor, you're a future liaison. You're being groomed into a cultural bridge, and bridges don't get opinions. They get walked on, and don't think they trust you even if they say they do. You're watched as closely here as you were at home. Maybe more. The foreign court is polite but cautious. Your letters are read before they're sealed. Your belongings are catalogued. The people closest to you here, the steward, the chamberlain, the smiling governess assigned to make your transition smooth, they're all reporting back. Maybe to your home court, maybe to theirs. You don't know. You just know better than to say anything honest. Historically, this fostering was standard practice. In medieval Europe, noble children were often sent to other courts, not just for education, but for control. Sometimes it was voluntary, often it wasn't. A young prince might be sent to his future in-laws as part of an engagement treaty. A princess might be raised in the court she was one day meant to marry into. But behind the etiquette was a clear message. Your body, your upbringing, even your personality, all of it can be moved, reshaped and negotiated. You are not your own, you are portable power. Take the case of Mary, Queen of Scots. She was sent to the French court at age 5 to be raised alongside her future husband, the Dauphin Francis. Her presence there was a political strategy, not an act of love. She spent most of her childhood surrounded by foreign tutors, speaking a language not her own, absorbing the customs of a court that viewed her less as a person, and more as an investment. She adapted, brilliantly, but she never truly belonged anywhere again. And for a fringe fact, in the 18th century, some royal children who were fostered abroad were assigned emotional handlers. Their job was to ensure the child didn't form inappropriate attachments to servants, to friends, to places. If a fostered prince grew too fond of his host kingdom, it was considered a security risk. One such handler kept a daily log of a royal child's facial expressions to monitor signs of excessive sentiment. A smile too wide could trigger a letter to the home court. The scholarly argument here splits into two camps. One side claims fostering was invaluable for creating worldly, multilingual, politically savvy monarchs, and sure, many became excellent diplomats. But others argue that these children grew up rootless, raised everywhere and loved nowhere. They became political chameleons, yes, but also emotional orphans. Home became a concept, not a place. Family became a performance, not a bond. You begin to notice this yourself. When you write home, your letters are stiff. I am well, you say. My studies continue. You don't ask about your siblings. You don't mention the nightmares. You certainly don't admit that sometimes, when you're alone in the garden here, you cry, not because you're in pain, but because you feel like you've disappeared, like you've been erased and redrawn in someone else's ink. And the strangest thing, No one treats you like a child anymore, not even a royal one. They treat you like an ambassador. Every interaction feels like a transaction. A courtier offers you a rare flower from their greenhouse, not because they think you'll like it, but because they want a favour. A young lord compliments your riding, not because he's impressed, but because he's angling for a position in your future court. Everyone is calculating, and now, so are you. There is no space for softness here. If you flinch, if you fumble, if you express doubt, it will be noticed. It might even be sent back home in coded phrases. The young heir displays signs of emotional fragility. You've learned what that means. It means they'll come for you, with new rules, new punishments, a new, colder you. You lie awake at night trying to remember what your real voice sounds like, not the one trained for diplomacy, but the one you used to speak with when you were still small, still whole. You try to recall the exact scent of your old room, the one thing you loved about your mother's presence, the colour of the sunrise outside your original window. But the memories blur. They start to feel borrowed, because you're no longer raised by people who love you. You're raised by the people who need you. There's a quiet shift in how people talk about your future. It's no longer a far-off concept or a vague promise. It's mapped out now, lined with expectations like flags planted in soil that isn't yours. You're told that one day you'll marry, not fall in love, not find someone. Marry. And the person has already been chosen, or at least shortlisted. You don't know them yet. Maybe you've met once as children in a ballroom you barely remember. Maybe you've only seen their portrait, framed in gold and painted with deliberate flattery. Either way, they're not a mystery. They're a transaction. You don't ask questions because you already know the answers. No, you can't choose someone else. No, you can't delay it. Yes, this is what's best for the realm. You're told that love comes later, if it comes at all. That affection can be built over time, like a treaty or a cathedral. All it takes is patience and shared interest, an understanding of your role, your duty, your lineage. Love, in this context, is something that must fit neatly inside a diplomatic agreement. It is signed in ink, not felt in the chest. The discussions happen in rooms just out of your reach. You hear fragments, your name mentioned alongside someone else's, the tone always clinical. She has the right bloodline. He's well positioned. Their union would secure the border. You're a pawn, yes, but also a bridge. Your body will tie two realms together. Your children will carry the weight of nations. It's not personal. It's necessary. It always is. Historically, this is one of the oldest rituals in the royal playbook. Marriages weren't formed from courtship. They were diplomatic tools, used to unite kingdoms, secure alliances and prevent wars. Anne of Austria was betrothed to Louis XIII of France before she could write her own name. Princess Margaret Tudor was married off to James IV of Scotland as part of a peace agreement between two kingdoms at war for centuries. Did they love their husbands? That's never the question. The question is, did the union serve its purpose? You try to imagine what it will be like. To sit across from someone you barely know, someone who's been raised with the same icy rituals, who was also told not to speak too freely or smile too much. Will you have anything to say? Will they listen when you talk? You wonder if they'll hold your hand because they want to or because protocol demands it. You hope in a quiet, guilty way that they're kind, that they'll see you, not the title, not the lineage, just you. But you don't get your hopes up. That kind of wishing is dangerous. It creates cracks in your armour, and those cracks have consequences. You've seen what happens to royals who hope too openly. History books are full of them. Romantic fools who fell in love with commoners, who refused arranged matches, who followed their hearts and ended up exiled, disgraced, or worse. You're not that foolish. Not anymore. And here's a strange historical footnote for you. In some royal courts, children were introduced to their future spouses through doll versions first. Little wooden effigies dressed in miniature court clothing, posed like a wedding cake topper. You were meant to look at the doll and imagine your future. This is who you'll stand beside, they'd say. This is your fate. Like picking out drapery for a room you don't want to live in. The scholars are split as always. Some argue that arranged. Royal marriages were surprisingly effective, stable, enduring, built on mutual understanding. Others point out that many were emotionally barren, maintained only through obligation and spectacle. Behind the polished portraits of royal couples are letters, journal entries and rumours of mistresses' secret affairs and lifelong indifference. Sometimes hatred, sometimes silence, sometimes a quiet truce mistaken for love. Back in your current reality, you're being prepared for courtship rituals. You learn how to dance, slow, formal steps with your eyes lowered just enough to be demure, but never submissive. You learn how to write letters full of elegant nothing. I look forward to our future. I am honoured by your words. You learn how to smile in a way that suggests affection, even when you feel nothing at all. Your tutors call this charm. You call it pretending. You're shown portraits of potential matches. Most are beautiful, but it's a distant, sculpted kind of beauty. Expressions fixed in noble neutrality, posture rigid, eyes blank. You stare at them and try to imagine a life, what their voice sounds like, whether they would laugh at your real jokes or just the polite ones, whether you'll lie beside them in bed someday and feel comforted, or just watched. And the worst part is the slow realization that your marriage will never belong to you. Your feelings won't matter. Your consent, if required, will be ceremonial. The entire union will be arranged around perception and strategy. You'll stand at the altar not because you want to, but because a group of men in velvet robes decided that your hands, when clasped together, will prevent a war. Your wedding will be a treaty signing dressed in white. Eventually you stop imagining love altogether. You reframe it as something for the poets and the peasants, something fragile like paper, something that can't survive in a world built on marble. You replace that longing with pride in your composure, your utility, your elegance. People praise your maturity, your readiness for union. They call you diplomatic, polished, graceful. You nod and say thank you. You do not tell them that you feel like a letter someone else wrote and sealed, but never read. Because in this world, love is not something you're allowed to find. It's something that finds you with a crown in one hand and a contract in the other. You start keeping a diary. It's not called that, of course. Diaries are for children, and you're far beyond that. At least, that's what they tell you. But still, you find a small notebook, nothing extravagant, and you begin to write. Not every day, just when something builds too loudly inside you to keep contained. You don't write in full sentences at first, just fragments, words you're not allowed to say out loud. I feel nothing. Today I was bored and sad and no one noticed. He smiled at me and I forgot what I was supposed to say. At first, the act feels risky. You've been trained to assume nothing is truly private. Your rooms are cleaned daily, your books dusted, your drawers opened and refolded. But still, you carve out a small hiding place, tucked behind the lining of your desk drawer, or inside a hollowed-out volume of history you never liked reading. Writing becomes a quiet rebellion, the one place you can exist without performance. Even if no one ever reads it, you've found a way to speak to yourself. Some entries are banal. Observations about the food, a description of a dream, a new word you like the sound of. Others cut deeper. Moments you couldn't react to at the time, but that now feel unbearable in retrospect. The way your father looked through you instead of at you. The sound of your sibling crying in the room next door, muffled behind too many walls. The way your chest tightens when you see a servant child being hugged by their parent. Something that still surprises you with its sharpness. You don't write for therapy. You wouldn't even call it that. You write because it's the only place where your feelings don't have to dress up. On the page, you're not a royal. You're not an heir. You're just you. An unnamed voice with too many thoughts and not enough space to hold them. You've never been taught how to reflect, only how to remember. But here, with pen in hand and no one watching, you begin to look inward, carefully, like stepping into a frozen lake. Historically, this wasn't uncommon. Many royal children kept journals, sometimes secretly, sometimes at the encouragement of a governess or tutor who believed it would improve their writing. Queen Victoria began journaling as a young girl and kept at it for over 60 years. Her early entries are surprisingly personal, frustrations with her mother, feelings of isolation, even moments of rebellion. But over time, her writing grew stiff, formal and self-conscious, likely aware that others would one day read them. The freedom was slowly drained, entry by entry. Here's a strange little side note. In the 18th century, some royal diaries were coded, written in invented languages or private ciphers. One Habsburg princess used colours instead of names. Blue for her governess, red for her sister, green for her secret crush, who was never named directly. The code was never broken by the court during her lifetime, but after her death, it was transcribed and published. Her secrets, long protected, became another chapter in royal law, and scholars still debate what these journals meant. Were they a genuine outlet, or just another layer of performance, private rehearsals for future publication? Some suggest that even in solitude, royal children had internalized their roles so completely that they could no longer express unfiltered emotion. Others argue that the very act of writing was, in itself, a radical resistance, a way of saying, I exist, not just as a title, but as a person. You like to believe the latter, because when you write it feels different. The words don't need to sound noble or wise. You don't even worry about your handwriting, though you've spent years being graded on it. Sometimes your entries spill out quickly, other times they stutter, but you always feel lighter afterward, like you've managed to drag a piece of yourself from beneath the velvet and stone. Of course, you can't say everything. Some feelings are still too large, too dangerous to put into words. The way your skin burns when someone you're not supposed to love looks at you for just a second too long. The way you sometimes wish you could disappear, not forever, just long enough to breathe. The way you sometimes envy the dead kings in your history books, if only because their stories have ended, and yours is still being written by everyone but you. You start giving yourself names in the margins, not your title, not your full name, just names, ones you've imagined, the kind of names people get when they're born without gold around their wrists. Milo, Sabine, Theo. You don't know why you do it. Maybe to imagine a life where you could be someone else, or maybe to make it easier to talk to yourself. Sometimes you write letters you never send, apologies, confessions, pleas. You write one to your mother once, asking why she never stayed after your bedtime prayers. You write another to your father, telling him you'd like to know what kind of boy he was before the crown. You write one to your sibling, the one you used to whisper with through the nursery walls, telling them you miss when things were simple, and then you fold them and tuck them inside the journal, knowing they'll never leave the room, and still you hide it, every time. Because if someone finds your journal, it won't be seen as vulnerability. It will be seen as a breach, a lapse in discipline, a danger to the image. They'll read your private words through a public lens, and everything true will become something shameful. So you keep the ritual secret, quiet, sacred. But in those few stolen minutes with pen in hand, you remember who you are, not who you're meant to be, not who they expect you to become, but the person that still flickers deep beneath the marble, that soft, stubborn ember that refuses to go out. And as long as you can write, you're not entirely gone. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like watching a season change through a palace window. One day, you're the child being led down the marble hallway. The next, someone else is trailing behind you, eyes wide, steps quick to match your stride. You don't remember the exact moment it shifted, but you feel it now. The weight of expectation is no longer something you're growing into. It's something you're wearing. Fully, heavily. You've become the example, the benchmark, the one the younger ones are told to emulate. And so, you do what's expected. You straighten your back even more. You speak in a tone so smooth it could be mistaken for detachment. You nod during meetings, arrive early for lessons, show a calculated level of warmth during ceremonies. The advisors beam at your maturity. Your parents, if they still take an interest, nod with quiet satisfaction. Dutiful, responsible, prepared. You're no longer learning to play the part. You are the part. Then the questions start to change. They stop asking what you're studying. Now they ask what policies you'll support. They want your opinions, but only within a narrow lane. You're allowed to think now, but only strategically. You're allowed to speak, but never too freely. You're expected to lead, but always in step with tradition. Any deviation, no matter how small, ripples out like a crack in stained glass. You're told not to get ahead of yourself. You're told that confidence must always come laced with deference. This is when the cycle completes. You catch yourself saying things your tutors once said to you. Stand taller. Speak clearly. Think before you answer. You hear the words come out of your mouth and they sound hollow. Not because they're wrong, but because they're the exact same tools that were used to shape you into something distant and polished. And now you're handing those same tools to someone else. You watch a younger cousin stumble through their curtsy, eyes filled with the same nervous energy you used to carry. You don't correct them, not aloud. You just give a smile that says, "I noticed," and you watch as they adjust. Because they've already learned that being noticed means being judged. You hate that you're part of this now. You hate that you're good at it. Historically, this is the phase where royal children transition into royal figures. The line between person and position dissolves. At age 13, Philip II of Spain was already presiding over council meetings. At 12, Queen Christina of Sweden signed her first official document. These weren't young rulers. These were children trapped inside ceremonial armour, praised for their maturity when all they wanted was permission to be human for 5 minutes. And here's your peculiar historical twist. In some courts, young royals were assigned shadow versions of themselves, children of similar age and status whose only job was to observe and mimic. These mirroring companions were used to test the heir's judgment and patience. If you scolded your mirror too harshly, you were seen as cruel. If you befriended them too deeply, you were seen as soft. They were not playmates, they were tools, and sometimes they were sent away without warning, leaving the heir confused, guilty, and even lonelier than before. Historians still argue whether stepping into this authority brought a sense of power, or just more elaborate forms of confinement. Some royals describe this stage as invigorating, finally having a voice, a role. Others reported a sharp drop in emotional support, a feeling that now, because they were grown, their needs no longer mattered. They became administrators of their own repression. You feel that shift yourself. No one asks how you're sleeping anymore. No one reminds you to take breaks. Your schedule fills with meetings instead of lessons, and the people in those rooms look at you differently now. Not as a child, not as a person really, as something useful, a future secured in silk and gold, a walking solution to centuries-old fears, and perhaps the strangest part, you start to accept it. Not just out of duty, but because it feels safer than resisting. The role becomes familiar, predictable. You know what to say, when to say it. You start to anticipate problems before they arise. You smooth out tensions, you make people comfortable. You're praised for your wisdom, your steadiness, your foresight. No one knows that most of it is just instinct now, survival dressed up as leadership. Still, something flickers now and then. A look in the mirror where you don't quite recognise your face. A moment when you speak and hear your father's tone instead of your own. A lingering ache when you walk past a servant holding their child and remember that no one held you that way. But you don't dwell on it. You don't write about it anymore either. The journal still exists, but it gathers dust now. You don't need it the way you once did. Or maybe you're just afraid of what you'd write if you opened it. You've reached the point where even love is political, where privacy is illusion, where emotions are either currency or liability. And yet here you are, polished, poised, prepared. Everyone says you're ready, but they never ask. Ready for what? To rule, to marry, to be paraded, to die quietly inside a crown. You don't have the answer, but you nod anyway. They begin teaching you how to make decisions that don't feel like decisions. Not the obvious kind, the weighty declarations stamped in wax and performed with ceremonial flourish. No, these are subtler, quieter. You're taught how to tilt a conversation toward an outcome without owning it, how to give someone permission to act while pretending you haven't. You learn how to influence without appearing responsible, how to direct without speaking too plainly, how to take control and still seem like you're following advice. This is power, not the sword-swinging kind, not the shout across the battlefield kind, but the kind that slides into a room with polished shoes and an unreadable face, the kind you don't even notice until it's already decided what you'll wear, where you'll stand, who you'll marry, and what you'll say about it afterward. And now it's your turn to wield it. At first, it's thrilling. You sit in on councils and people defer to you. Advisors lean in when you speak. Someone records your opinion, and you realise that your words are no longer theoretical. They ripple outward. You see the effects days later. A schedule change, a reassigned servant, a minor trade shift, all because of something you said half thoughtfully over tea. You feel the rush of consequence, the realisation that you no longer merely endure this world, you shape it. But the thrill doesn't last, because soon you see what else comes with it. You make a suggestion, and someone loses their position. You approve a guest list, and someone is snubbed. You ask for a report on grain shortages, and suddenly rumours of unrest swirl through the halls. You didn't cause it, not directly, but your fingerprints are there, faint but present. You start to understand why so many in power speak carefully, why some say nothing at all. Historically, many royal children entered this strange shadow phase of authority in their early teens. They were involved, but not fully in charge, trusted, but still managed. Louis XIV began sitting with his ministers at age 12, though he didn't rule independently until years later. Queen Elizabeth I was asked her opinion on political matters by age 10, especially during times of instability, when her very presence was used to soothe worried nobles. They weren't just preparing to lead, they were being tested for loyalty, temperament, and how well they could play the game. And here's your fringe detail. In some courts, young heirs were presented with test dilemmas, hypothetical scenarios involving betrayals, crises, or failures of judgment. The answers weren't recorded for education. They were studied by spies and ministers who used them to build psychological profiles. The point wasn't to teach, it was to assess, to know what kind of ruler the child might become, or what kind of threat. Now you find yourself in the same game. You're being watched constantly, but the gaze has changed. It's no longer evaluating your posture or pronunciation. Now it's measuring your mind. Are you decisive? Are you cautious? Are you too emotional? Too indifferent? Every sentence is weighed, every silence catalogued. You're not just being observed, you're being analysed. And here's the twist. You begin to analyse yourself too. You hear your own voice and wonder if it sounds convincing. You reread letters before sealing them, not for grammar but for implication. You predict reactions before you speak, crafting your statements like puzzles. Yes, I believe that's wise, you say, meaning, I'll allow it, but I'll deny it later if needed. Let's reconsider our position, meaning, retreat now, before anyone notices we were wrong. It's exhausting, but effective. You become more careful with your affections, even more than before. Not just because they're dangerous, but because now you understand how even a glance can become policy. If you linger too long near a foreign envoy, rumours of alliance begin. If you praise a steward too warmly, courtiers accuse you of favouritism. Every gesture is political, every absence suspicious. Your body has become a tool of governance, your presence a kind of legislation. You begin to dread invitations, dinners, balls, hunts. Not because you dislike company, but because every guest list is a minefield. Accepting an offer can signal support. Declining one can insult a house you didn't even realise was fragile. You're forced to develop a second brain, one that tracks loyalties, debts, suspicions, and perceptions, all in the background of your polite smile. And yet somehow, you're praised more than ever. You're becoming a fine leader, they say, measured, diplomatic, strategic. You nod and say thank you, but you're not sure if it's leadership or just very advanced mimicry. You're not choosing this path so much as you're calculating each step to avoid the traps. You don't feel wise, you feel weary. Late at night, you lie awake and think of simpler things. The time your governess scolded you for laughing too loudly, the way your childhood pet would lean against your legs, the scent of the first book you truly loved. You wonder how much of you is still there, underneath the layers of decisions and detachment, underneath the mask that now fits so well it barely feels like a mask at all. You sometimes catch your reflection in the palace glass, tall, poised, shoulders back, and you see the person they wanted you to become. It should feel like triumph. But all you can think is, I don't remember when I stopped being afraid of them, and started becoming them. This is what they mean when they say you've grown up. Not that you've learned more, but that you've learned to hide better, to lead without appearing to control, to manipulate without seeming cruel, to feel nothing, or at least nothing that slows you down. And still, somewhere deep in the pit of your chest something flickers. Not rebellion, not grief, just a faint persistent whisper. There must be another way. But no one teaches you what that is. Eventually they stop telling you what to do, not because you've become free, but because you've become predictable. You've absorbed the code so thoroughly that no reminders are needed. You don't wait for permission to speak anymore, because you've already calculated whether you should. You don't ask which fork to use or when to rise from a banquet table, or how to respond to a visiting dignitary's subtle insult. You just know. and the knowing has replaced everything else. You've become the quiet force everyone hoped you would. Reliable, impressive, intact. People move around you like orbiting moons, deferential and complimentary. They toast your wisdom. They applaud your poise. The younger children in the court now imitate you. The same way you once tried to imitate your father, or your mother, or whichever perfect mask was held up as your role model that year. You've become someone else's measuring stick. But in all of this applause, no one asks if you're okay. Not because they're cruel, but because they assume okayness has already been designed into your bones. To them, you are a finished product. They think you've been forged, not grown, that your will was shaped, not earned, that your emotions, if they ever existed, have long since been folded into ceremony. Sometimes you wake in the early morning, long before the servants stir, and you lie there in your vast cold bed, wondering, what if you hadn't turned out this way? What if you'd broken the pattern, run off into the woods, married someone purely for joy, written something embarrassing, cracked under the weight of it all and simply said no? But the fantasy dissolves quickly, because deep down you know what would have happened. History tells you. The ones who resist get rewritten, or erased. And so, you continue. You perform, yes, but the performance has become indistinguishable from your reality. When you laugh now, you don't know if it's because something is funny or because you've trained yourself to appear human at the right moments. When someone thanks you, you don't know if you feel pride or if you're just relieved you didn't fail the script. When you're alone, you don't feel peace. You feel exposed, like a stage with the curtain down but the light still on. You've been raised without love, but not without intention, and that's almost worse, because it means every gesture of distance, every cold dismissal, every corrected laugh and cut-off hug, none of it was accidental. It was a design. You were sculpted. The absence of affection wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. Historically, you were in familiar company. Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, who ruled for nearly 70 years, was reportedly so emotionally distant that his own son, Crown Prince Rudolf, wrote in a letter, "I have never heard a word of affection from my father, only commands, criticism, and silence." Rudolf, raised in opulence and coldness, eventually took his own life in what became one of Europe's most scandalous tragedies. His rebellion wasn't against politics, it was against lovelessness. Now, here's the fringe fact that haunts you. In some courts, particularly during the Enlightenment, there were attempts to simulate parental affection with staff. Some royal children were assigned emotional tutors, gentle companions whose job was to emulate love. They were trained to hug, to soothe, to listen. Not because the parents wanted to connect, but because they wanted the illusion of a nurturing childhood without the time or emotional risk. Hired affection, like court jesters of the soul. Scholars remain divided on the long-term impact of this architecture of emotional neglect. Some argue it created exceptional rulers, clear-headed, disciplined, unshakable. Others see the cracks beneath the polish, the loneliness passed down like a crown, the succession not just of blood, but of silence. You begin to realise that no one ever wanted you to be happy. They wanted you to be useful. That's the difference. Happiness is unstable. It changes, it demands, it distracts. Usefulness is reliable. It doesn't talk back. It performs on schedule. It bows when told. And in your quietest moments you wonder what you lost. Not just freedom or affection, but possibility. Wonder. That warm, unfiltered joy you only remember in fragments now. A laugh in the nursery, the scent of the bakery fire when you snuck downstairs, the rough bark of the tree you once climbed before someone decided you were too important to fall. You think of the children you'll raise, if you're ever allowed to raise them yourself. You imagine how you'll be expected to replicate the process, maintain the distance, pass on the strength, train them to become something useful, like you. But then a question stirs in you. Could I do it differently? Could you look at your child and say, you're allowed to cry? Could you hold them, not because a tutor recommends it, but because you want to? Could you love them in a way that makes the palace nervous? Maybe, maybe not. But the thought lingers, because deep down, beneath the silk, beneath the posture, beneath the carefully cultivated grace, there is still a part of you that remembers what love could feel like. Not ceremonial, not conditional, not staged, just real. And that memory, small as it is, stubborn as it is, may be the one thing that still belongs to you. So here you are. 30 sections later, the lights have dimmed, The palace halls have quieted, and your story, a strange mix of power and emptiness, sits gently on your chest like a silken weight. You've walked the marble corridors, bowed when told, spoken only when asked, and smiled with a mouth that often didn't feel like yours. You were watched before you understood what it meant to be seen, groomed before you knew what it meant to grow, raised without love, but never without purpose. It wasn't cruelty exactly, it was design, cold affection as policy, distance as discipline, emotional starvation dressed in brocade and powdered wigs. You learned early what was wanted from you: composure, silence, performance, and you gave it, because you had no other choice. Because a royal child's life isn't a life, it's a symbol on display, a performance rehearsed before the curtain ever rises. But still you felt things, you hid them, wrote them down, whispered them to animals, to pages, to yourself. That whisper, soft and constant, may be the truest thing you ever had. The reminder that somewhere under the layers there's still a person. Not a role, not a future monarch, just you. Maybe that whisper grows someday. Maybe you become the kind of royal who dares to offer love even in a palace designed to prevent it. Maybe you don't. But either way, you made it this far. You survived, not unchanged, but still here. Now let the weight of the story fall away. Unclench your jaw, loosen your shoulders, take a breath that's yours and yours alone, and as you drift off tonight, let that whisper remind you, even in the loneliest palace, a quiet heart still beats.